Good evening. I call to order this regular meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District. It is Tuesday, January 25th. The time is 6:01 p.m. Vice President Hartwells, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will start off with a roll call vote, starting from my far right.
Zach Lindsay.
Patty Beckman. Libby Hartwells.
John Michael Greenberg.
Thank you. We have all 5 governing board members present. We do have a quorum. At this time, I would like governing board members to propose any changes to the meeting agenda. Are there any changes at this time? Seeing no changes, I ask for a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Board Member Beckman,
Second.
seconded by Vice President Hartwells. Please note that public,
All those in favor?
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Vote passes 5-0. We will advance to part 2 of our agenda. Public comments notification. Please note that public comments will be heard after our superintendent's comments. I want to remind all of our guests about our meeting decorum, and I will read that before we begin our public comment section. At this time, I'd like to turn over our meeting to Dr. Menzel to recognize our student and staff celebrations.
Good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, and members of the governing board. As Scottsdale Unified's 125th anniversary celebrations continue, we are always pleased to be able to introduce to you some of the extraordinary students, educators, and employees of our district. We are only ever able to present just a sliver of them to you, but as you know, there are many, many more achieving great things in our classrooms every day. Tonight, we would like to introduce you to a budding animator who has been invited to take part in a very special school right before spring break. Dr. Melissa Sackos, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, is here to tell us about her. Dr. Sackos.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel, and good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, governing board members, and Ms. Wagner. I'd like to invite up from Saguaro High School, student Annalise Jones, and Math and Science Academy coordinator Susan Lindberg to join me at the podium. Hi. 15 years ago, Walt Disney World Resort created an educator mentorship program for outstanding high school students. Each year, it invites 100 such students to a 4-day camp in Orlando, Florida, to broaden their career awareness and create opportunities for teens from underrepresented community across the nation. This year's Disney Dreamers will be introduced to an array of new immersions that are designed to continue to foster the dreams of young leaders, including career-building workshops, networking sessions, mentorship connections, and introductions to future professionals' opportunities at the Walt Disney Company. And do I dare say, to infinity and beyond? Okay. As I said earlier, just 100 students from across the country are invited to attend the Disney Dreamers Academy, and Annalise, who is a sophomore at Saguaro, is one of just 2 Arizona high school students to be named to the Academy's class of 2022. Annalise, along with the other 99 students from across the United States, will gather in Orlando, Florida, March 3rd through March 6th. Annalise is going to attend sessions on leadership skills, effective communication techniques, and networking strategies, as well as in-depth workshops on diverse career paths with business, entertainment, and sciences. And she'll get a deep dive into her career choice, shadowing and working with professionals in her chosen future field, animation. How can there possibly be a better place to do that than Disney World? Congratulations, Annalise, and we expect a full report, if not a 2-minute cartoon, when you get back. You grab me that. And so before you go, I would like to present you with this foundation, SUSD challenge coin in recognition of all of your accomplishments, and hopefully you take this to Disney World, take a snap, and come back with it, okay?
Yeah.
All right, congratulations.
What a wonderful opportunity for you to expand your learning, Annalise, and find out about careers that are open to you and your interests. We do hope you'll have a great time when you're in Orlando. The next celebration is something I think all of us look forward to every year, and that is meeting some of Scottsdale Unified's most outstanding educators. Our Director of Teaching and Learning, Dr. Kim Dodds-Karen, has the honor tonight to present our National Board Certified Teachers. Dr. Dodds-Karen.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel, and good evening, Governing Board President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, Governing Board members, and Ms. Wagner. Tonight we are here to celebrate a cadre of outstanding Scottsdale Unified educators. These teachers have taken it upon themselves to go beyond standard requirements and have engaged in the rigorous process of becoming nationally board certified teachers. Teachers, as I call your name, will you please join me at the podium with your principal if they are here with you? Jennifer Antrim, who teaches high school courses for Scottsdale Online. Thank you. We'll be giving you and stay standing, please. Abby Bobbitt, who is a teacher at Laguna Elementary School. She is our reading specialist. Karen Brisbane, she teaches 6th grade math at Kokopah Middle School. Erin Hansen, an elementary school teacher with Scottsdale Online. Kurt Robinson, a 2nd grade teacher at Desert Canyon Elementary School. Stephanie Shammy, the K-5 gifted specialist at Laguna Elementary. Julie Sparks, a Desert Canyon Elementary School physical education teacher. Shannon Stapley from Desert Canyon Middle School. She teaches gifted social studies. Bert Teveld, he's a 7th grade science teacher. He's also the coach for the Mojave Middle School robotics team. Karen Wiebel, she teaches kindergarten at Sequoia Elementary School. And unable to join us tonight are Kelly Akridge, who teaches 4th grade gifted students in Redfield's Comprehensive Gifted Program, and Kokopah Middle School's Danette Amafidun, who teaches in the Shine program. Also, Arcadia High School math teacher Jennifer Ducalo is unable to be here tonight. But National Board Certification is one of the most respected professional certifications available in our K-12 education system. The certification process is designed to develop, retain, and recognize accomplished teachers and generate school improvement nationwide. To tell us a little bit more about SUSD's National Board Certification is our NBC coach extraordinaire somewhere behind the masses, Susan Leonard, who is a physical education teacher at Ingleside Middle School. Susan?
Madam President, Dr. Menzel, board members, and Mrs. Wagner. The initial path to National Board Certification takes 1 to 3 years to complete. I'm proud to say that SUSD has one of 68 new MBCTs in Arizona. It's truly impressive when a colleague chooses to put their practice up for review against the most rigorous of standards. A process which less than 10% of the teachers from across the United States even attempt, and the achievement rate is about 50 to 70% of that number. It's even more impressive that after attaining such a respected status, an educator would choose to put their practice up for review again against these same rigorous standards. I am pleased to share that Scottsdale Unified School District has 12 of the 100 educators in the state who have done just that and have successfully renewed their certification. SUSD's 83 MBCTs ranks us as one of the highest numbers of any district in Arizona. But what is, in my opinion, the strongest evidence of the significant impact the national board process is having on our students is the number of MBCTs who choose to renew. The renewal process has evolved and is now referred to as maintenance of certification, or MOC. Successfully meeting MOC requirements will extend an MBCT certificate by 5 years from their current certificate's expiration date. The process ensures National Board Certified teachers continue to grow professionally while maintaining a strong impact on student learning. MOC is intended to make ongoing certification engaging and professionally meaningful for MBCTs. In addition, it communicates to both the public and policymakers the professionalism and continually ensuring the knowledge and skills of its members, of its own members. It is a personal and public statement of their commitment to the profession and their students. Accomplished teachers recognize professional learning and growth never ends. In closing, I want to thank you, the SUSD Foundation, and the Scottsdale Charles for your unwavering support of our teachers as they go through the process and your continued support after they achieve certification.
And before we pass out your plaques to recognize this accomplishment, we do also want to thank Susan's team of current and retired SUSD educators that coach our teachers on the certification and recertification process. Some of our CSPs, or candidate support providers, are here tonight. So if you hear your name being called, you can stand. We'll look for you. Tammy Andreas from Cochise Elementary. Abby Bobbitt, front and center, who you've already met. Claren Gutsky from Chaparral. Ann Waddington from Cherokee. And two of our retired teachers who are not able to be here with us tonight, but Bobby Faulkner and Mary Zangalowitz. These dedicated teachers and our former teachers generously give their time and their expertise to our teacher candidates as they navigate this process for National Board Certification. So we want to congratulate you all. We are very proud of you. Big round of applause. So please bear with us as we give them their plaques.
We got some hardware. Yes. Just Abby Bobbitt. Thank you. Karen Brooklyn. To go that way when we're done. Karen Hansen. Stephanie County. Thank you. Kurt Robinson. Jennifer Intram. Julie Sparks. Shannon Stapley, our new MDC. Bert Tavell. And Karen Lee.
We want to congratulate our NBCT teachers. We are extremely proud of the extra path that you've taken to bring excellent instruction to our students. That concludes our celebrations this evening.
Awesome. Congratulations to Annalise and all of the NBCT renewed staff members, as well as our new inductee. Very exciting, and I know that is quite an accomplishment because it's quite a task that process is. So at this point, we are going to move on to superintendent's comments. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Sanowski, members of the governing board. I do have a few things to speak about this evening. The first is an announcement regarding the Coronado Promise Partnership. We are excited to update you on the launch of the Coronado Promise. For the past 2+ years, we have been working to identify how best to support the Coronado learning community and position our students for post-secondary success. This is a remarkable community collaboration between many of our greatest supporters and partners, including the Coronado Foundation for the Future, the Scottsdale Charros, Scottsdale Community College, the City of Scottsdale, and other committed community members. The promise actually is this: together we promise to promote early aspirations of higher education, provide funding for tuition, and support achievement in higher education for the Coronado learning community. The community goal is to provide support and funding to eligible Coronado High School graduates for the first 2 years of higher education. And our hope over time is to build on this across the district for our other high schools. The kickoff will be here at Coronado High School on February 2nd, outside in the courtyard at 4 p.m., and we look forward to seeing all of you there, and it is an open invitation to our community members. I want to express appreciation for Board Member Beckman's role in helping to ensure that this continued to move forward, and we are really excited for the launch next week. Secondly, I'd like to point out that January is School Board Recognition Month. And I want to take this time to thank you for your extraordinary service to our students and community. This is a job that comes with a number of challenges and opportunities, and sometimes can be a lot more than you might have anticipated when you chose to run for the office. At the same time, when we get to celebrate student success and our teachers, and we see the great things that are happening every day, I think you can also recognize that the rewards of being part of an exceptional school system sometimes are worth the challenges that you face. This environment in particular has been challenging as we work through COVID considerations, as we work through developing a new strategic plan, but each of you have come to the table and provided your very best thinking as we work on ensuring that our district engages all students in world-class, future-focused education. So on behalf of the Scottsdale team, we want to thank you during Board Appreciation Month. As some of you may know, Monday was the 100th day of enrollment. And so that's an important date in the state of Arizona as we look at average daily membership and its impact on our overall funding. It's from an actual student count, we are down 219 K-12 students from 100 days a year ago. But if you look at the average daily membership calculation, which is a weighted formula, we are up 615 ADM over last year. And so while we have not returned to our pre-pandemic enrollment numbers, we are in a better position this year than we were last year at the same time in terms of average daily membership. The next thing I want to talk about is National School Choice Week. You may know that this week is National School Choice Week, and we'd like to take this moment to thank all of those who choose to learn and work here in Scottsdale Unified. We recognize that our parents have many choices when it comes to meeting their child's educational needs. 21% of our students are open enrolled from other districts in Scottsdale Unified. Another 24% of our students open enroll from within the boundaries, choosing one of our many excellent educational opportunities for their students. I often talk about being Scottsdale Unified, but not Scottsdale Uniform, and it's really nice to be able to celebrate the broad array of services and supports and educational opportunities available to our students. We pride ourselves on being the premier destination for public education and have a 125-year legacy of student success stories to prove it. Another positive story in the news is that, if you might have heard it this morning, back in December we noted, sadly, that a former Chaparral graduate, Officer Tyler Moldovan, was shot in the line of duty. Today he was released out of the hospital and moved to a rehab facility, and so we are grateful that there's progress there. Three more things, and then I will be done tonight. Teacher and staff support during these times is of paramount importance. And last week, County Superintendent Steve Watson convened a group of people for a town hall meeting around teacher stress. There were really good ideas shared in terms of creative strategies to address the three areas that surfaced in a survey that he conducted around time, trust, and safety. And our leadership team is continuing to identify opportunities to address how we might be able to relieve some of the stress on our staff as we navigate these challenges. As was announced on Friday, one of the pieces, what I'll call low-hanging fruit, was that when we have district PD, we can maybe take, the requirement to participate off the table. And so we've let our staff know that while the PD will still be provided, it's optional. Teachers can determine how they want to use that time that will best meet their needs. We'll make the PD available at another time in terms of recording so that it's there. And all of the staff that have taken the time to put that together, their work will not go unrecognized, because that was important as well. Another thing that I hope will be helpful is that beginning next Monday, January 31st, we will allow volunteers to begin returning to classrooms. We know that that's an important support for many of our classroom teachers. And while we put the restriction in place at the beginning of the year due to the high numbers of Omicron cases, we are beginning to see those cases come down, and the health individuals have, the people who work in public health have indicated they expect that decline will be pretty significant, and we want to be in the place of being able to provide some additional support for our classroom teachers. Two final topics for this evening. One is the aggregate expenditure limit. And we've talked about this before, but until the legislature acts, we need to continue putting it in front of our community. The aggregate expenditure limit is a constitutional provision that requires the Arizona Department of Education to conduct a review of education expenditures in the aggregate based on a formula. That includes the number of students in the state, it includes the expenditures, and that formula has been impacted this last year by two fundamental changes. One, during the pandemic last year, we lost 50,000 plus students in the state, and two, Prop 301 money, which used to be outside of the formula, is now inside the formula, and that's roughly $500 million that comes into the equation. Given the variables that are at play here, the aggregate expenditure limit will be exceeded by more than $1 billion. The solution to that is not anything that any school district has done. It's not a part of bad budgeting. We actually built a budget based on what the Arizona legislature appropriated and the governor signed back in June. So if the legislature fails to override the aggregate expenditure limit, every public school system, charters are exempted because they were not in existence in 1980 when the constitutional amendment was passed, every public school district will be required to reduce their budget by 16%. So for the last quarter of the year, April, May, and June, every district will have to reduce its budget by 16%. For Scottsdale Unified, that would represent more than $27 million. This is not a revenue problem. The state has the money. They appropriated the money. They don't have a problem for the local districts in that regard, but the impact would be catastrophic for every district. When you get to the end of a school year and you're asked to reduce your budget by 16%, when 85% of our budget is tied up in staff compensation and benefits. So this is not something that we are powerless to respond to. Our elected officials have the ability by May 1st to override the aggregate expenditure limit, or March 1st, not May 1st, March 1st. And we have created a one-page talking points document so that anyone who wants to be able to explain it, because it's a pretty complex formula, but there are some key points. It's on our website. Anyone can access that in order to be able to know what the issues are and to encourage our elected officials to act before it's too late. If they don't act by March 1st, the governing board is required by April 1st to adopt changes to our budget that address a $27 million reduction in expenditures. So this is a very serious topic. Finally, the issue of Afghan refugees in our community has been a topic of conversation. And I want to point out a couple of things that are really important to note here. First, the refugees that are in Scottsdale are here at the invitation of the United States government. They were individuals who assisted the United States while we were and had military forces deployed in Afghanistan. Additionally, efforts are being undertaken to protect their privacy as much as possible because of the very real risk they and their families back home in Afghanistan face if their information becomes public. And while I know there are a lot of people who want to have a lot of questions answered with respect to specifics about these individuals, we have an obligation to protect their privacy. We have an obligation to provide a high-quality educational experience to each one of them. They reside within our district. They're covered under the federal McKinney-Vento Act, and we are going to treat them with dignity and respect like we will every single one of our students within this school district. And we will continue to support our teachers and our staff as we prepare to welcome additional students into our schools. Thank you.
That was a lot of good information. Thank you, Dr. Menzel. I appreciate you sharing the good and the necessary. That's not always good. The aggregate expenditure limit is something that we all need to be paying very careful attention to, so I appreciate you bringing that into your public comment. Speaking of, we are moving on to the public comment section of our meeting at this point. Do I have all the parts?
Yes.
All the parts? Okay. Just as a reminder, our public meeting decorum states that citizens attending and/or participating in Scottsdale Unified School District meetings, either in person, virtually, or telephonically, are required to observe the same rules of order and decorum applicable to members of the governing board and staff. And unauthorized remarks or demonstrations from members of the audience, yells, outbursts, and/or other disruptions are not permitted. At this time, I would like to call...
How much time does each speaker have?
Oh, thank you for the reminders. He's providing grace in my new role. Appreciate that. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes of time, and if you go over the 2 minutes, your microphone will be cut off, and understand that just delays the process of allowing everyone to have input in our public meetings. I will say the person who's coming up, at that time I'd like the person to approach the podium, and then I will also say who's next, so they can prepare and be ready to come up for 2 minutes of public comment. And please pardon any name mispronunciations. Rich Hoffler is up, followed by Jill Duncan.
First, I'd like to thank Scottsdale police officers for their work to protect our community and protect and serve our community. And that's what I'd like to talk about tonight. Hate and intolerance of any form should not be allowed in Scottsdale schools. This should also extend to police and school resource officers. I should not have to educate this board on the fact that there's anti-police programming in Scottsdale schools. GLSEN is an organization that creates content used in Scottsdale GSA clubs, has provided safe space training for teachers, and has recently praised Scott Menzel for his support. But they promote hatred of police. GLSEN hides behind their LGBTQ focus. The district frames any criticism of GLSEN as anti-GSA, but has anyone on this board looked into GLSEN's radical positions? GLSEN material claims systematic brutality of the police state and its supposed ties to white supremacy. Students are left with the impression that police should be abolished and that the policing in general is rooted in racism. I don't believe for one second that the officers that are here tonight are white supremacists or operate in racist ways. Why should SUSD encourage students to believe this nonsense, to hate these guys that are here for us? GLSEN also calls for the elimination of school resource officers, claiming that they make marginalized students feel unsafe. Why should we be teaching this to our students? Plain and simple, GLSEN engages in anti-police, anti-SRO hate speech. This board is either uneducated about GLSEN propaganda or
Wrapping it up.
just doesn't care.
Thank you for wrapping it up. Jill Duncan is up, followed by Jeff Steffen.
Hate speech does not align with the district's stated values of integrity, empathy, inclusion, and unity. Yet hate speech is being allowed in our schools. And worse, it's being supported and defended by our administration. At Desert Mountain, a teacher led a club discussion about intersectionality, which is a construct that encourages students to judge each other based on immutable labels for the purpose of stack ranking their victimhood status and identifying their oppressors. This type of teaching ultimately aims to segregate students by race and sexual orientation. This is, simply put, racist. This is hate speech. How can a teacher be allowed to plant the idea in a child's mind that their ability to achieve is determined by their skin color? Why would a teacher shame a white child into accepting guilt for the accused oppression of their peers? Broadly applying negative characteristics to a group of people based solely on their skin color is the essence of racism. This is hate speech. So what's the source of this hate speech? GLSEN and their GSA clubs. And what's been done to solve the issue of racist hate speech in our schools? Well, first, Scott Menzel, you attempted to gaslight this community by reframing curriculum critiques as targeted attacks on students. And now, the district's attorney is personally refusing to fulfill public records requests about GLSEN and the sexuality clubs. I can only imagine what you're hiding. Perhaps the district's time would be better spent protecting our children from GLSEN's hate speech. If the district is truly committed to an inclusive environment for every single student, GLSEN's racist programming must be removed. Scottsdale schools
Thank you for
must
wrapping it up.
not
Your 2
allow
minutes
hate speech.
is up. Up now is Jeff Steffen, followed by Michelle Clan.
Thank you, board members. Everyone in the crowd, it's great to see you. I just wanted to read a Bible verse, Proverbs 29:2. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And many of us are mourning in Scottsdale due to your leadership, and under Joe Biden, we are mourning severely. It is really bad. I encourage all of you in the community, if you are a godly man or woman, please run for school board, run for local offices. We need godly men and women leading our country to take this back. I also wanted to read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Further, so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. I also wanted to share, I am completely unvaccinated, unmasked, and unafraid. I will never, ever take the poisonous mRNA injections that Scott Menzel always recommends. And if you have kids under the age of 18, please never, ever give them the Fauci fake vaccines. They're absolutely terrible. I wanted to ask the board if you could please remove CNN from all public televisions in our schools. CNN is now a pedophile news network. I also wanted to add, please do not remove school resource officers. I'm really worried about the thought exchange you guys emailed out last night. We need cops. They keep our kids safe. They keep us safe. God bless the men and women in blue that protect our community.
Thank you for wrapping that up. Have a good night. Up now is Michelle Clan, followed by, looks like Ben Watkins.
Yeah. I put in a card for Lee Dundas first, and she was number 4.
That's the one you couldn't read.
What is the name?
Lee Dundas. Lee Taylor.
Okay. We couldn't read the name.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So
Thank you.
I put it at the end, and I was going to say if someone who put their card in. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's Lee.
Taylor.
Thank you. Okay, Lee Taylor is up, followed by Ben Watkins.
No, Michelle.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Followed by Michelle Clan. We'll get this.
Human Rights Attorney Lee Dundas, the fact that Scottsdale Unified District was until recently being led by a 28-year-old male attorney still living at home with his father who misused his mantle of trust as school board president to allow for a collection of minor school children's photos in his district to be warehoused on a personal computer or G drive that he had access to, which also included such information as their family's dates of birth, property and tax records, license plate numbers, vehicle records, divorce proceedings, criminal histories, financial records, mortgage records, and not least surveillance footage garnished from hidden cameras is nothing short of horrifying. Greenberg was elected to represent the families in this district, not to allow for the warehousing of a KGB-style dossier on drives he had access to. What we, the people, want to know, and what you as an entire school board should be asking, is whether this little goat rope was funded by taxpayer dollars or school monies, because this goat rope is something that Senator Joe McCarthy would have blushed about, and probably Hitler's Gestapo would have applauded. Further, why in the heck is he still sitting on this board after this came to light? And by the way, who is bonding Mr. Greenberg? Surety bonds for elected officials exist to ensure the elected official carries out their duties with integrity and fidelity. Pictures of little 8-year-old girls and 10-year-old girls being warehoused on a G drive he had access to in his home, is that how he executes his public duties, with fidelity and integrity? There is one reason, and only one reason I can think of, that a 28-year-old man would have 8 and 10-year-old photos of children in this district on a G drive he had access to. And let me tell you, friends, it has nothing to do with integrity or fidelity. If I were a bond company, I wouldn't touch this man with a 10-foot pole, and neither should you.
Michelle Clan, followed by Ben Watkins.
Hi, my name is Mickey Klein, and I'm holding in my hand the agreement that you recently signed in order to obtain $30 million in ESSER funds from the federal government. You've agreed to enforce strict mask policies, strict contact tracing policies, free vaccination clinics for teachers and students, and you've agreed to bring in federally funded social workers to enforce this agenda. Since receiving these funds, the teachers have been encouraging our children to take vaccinations, and that their age of consent is 5 years old. Really? Since when are any of these teachers in the school district qualified to give medical advice to children? And since when in the history of our great nation have you ever wanted to take on that liability? And who is liability if one single child dies of a vaccine? Due to this very unfortunate circumstance, I stand before you today with a letter of intent to file a claim against your surety bond. Please be advised that you will be personally liable for up to $100,000 per claim, and I have 10 claims. If you do not resolve the following issues within the next 5 business days. Number 1, Jan Michael Greenberg needs to resign. Number 2, remove all masking and testing requirements both on and off campus and stop recommending them entirely. Number 3, close down any and all vaccine clinics to stop recommending them to anyone. From this day forward, it will be the sole decision of the parents to make health-related decisions for their children. Number 4, you must renegotiate all of your terms with regard to the most recent ESSER contract. Moving forward, every line item that you agree to must be voted on by all of the parents. You must provide us your books, because in number 5, we will perform an audit with regards to school spending as well as the spending of these ESSER funds over the past 2 years. And number 6, you must, and I mean you must, remove all the books in the school libraries or curriculum that promote pedophilia, underage sex, abortion, or any other unacceptable forms of sexual influence upon our children. During every communist regime takeover in the country, in the history of our world, they've always used these programs to...
Thank you for wrapping it up. It's time for Ben Watkins.
I'm sorry, you're not allowed to give members.
I'm just serving them.
You are not allowed to serve in
Yeah,
public.
I must serve them publicly, or else that's for you, Katie, and that's for you.
No.
Please have a seat. Please have a seat. Please have a seat.
Mr. Greenberg is not here this evening, and you board members are instructed
He is here, I serve.
Ma'am, your time is up. It's time for Ben Watkins to begin. Thank you.
Communism is encroaching on our country. Communist school boards are now indoctrinating our children with transsexual propaganda and teaching them to be racist against white people by teaching racist Biden's critical racist theory. I'm not white myself, but I've dealt with racism and understand how dangerous and misguided it is to teach our children to be racist. Teaching our vulnerable children to be racist and indoctrinating them with transsexual propaganda was not the intent of our founding fathers when they fought and sacrificed for our freedoms so many years ago. The communist creeps at our school boards are now taking our parental rights away by teaching our children that they can be vaccinated without parental consent. This is a blatant destruction of the family unit with the goal of undermining our society from the ground up. Communism must not take hold. We must never comply with communist policies. I am Ron Watkins, running for Congress in Arizona's District Number 2. When I am elected to office, I will be
Your
introducing
time to
legislation
speak is over. There's no
to stop
electioneering
the communist
allowed during
creeps at school
public
boards
comment.
around our beautiful state
Andrea
and
Cohen,
country
you are up
from
right
enacting
now.
unconstitutional, tyrannical, liberty-destroying,
Please cup the mic.
policies. Without God, we have tyranny.
Sir, it is time for you to sit down.
We need to ask James.
James, can you please have him sit down? Thank you. We have a meeting to put forward.
I give notice of my intent to file a claim against the bonds of this school board for enforcing unconstitutional policies.
Sir, it's time for you to sit down.
If the school board does not immediately
Sir, you need to sit down or leave.
policies, I intend to file.
It's time for Andrea Cohen up, followed by Amy Bean.
God bless.
Just a reminder of our decorum expectation. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that was rude.
Agree.
My name is Andrea Cohen, and while my children are now college age, as a parent living in Scottsdale Unified School District, I want to applaud your efforts to further address the social, emotional, and mental health of our students and staff. At a time when funding is being pulled from our public schools and content is being challenged, I appreciate your desire not to ignore threats to our children. COVID-19 has increased the amount of stress felt by students, and at a time when life is already stressful. Suicide attempts in children less than 15 have increased over the past 2 years. It has never been easy being a child or teen, and in this world with so much negative noise, I appreciate you looking for ways to support both them at school and at home. In the proposal by Dr. Hartwells on tonight's agenda, I want to express my support for increased suicide awareness training for teachers and administrators so that they recognize the warning signs as well as addressing known risk factors for suicide. I also want to extend my support for the provision of educational materials to students and families to an evidence-based program on the safe storage of firearms. Approximately 5.5 million children live in a household with at least one gun that is easily accessible, but research shows that up to a third of firearm-related deaths in children could be prevented if adults safely stored their guns. I'm asking the board to do everything they can to help our students navigate this stressful time in our lives. When my children attended Cheyenne Traditional School, I was on the PTO board. I attended the funeral for the son of my fellow board member. Hunter was in 8th grade when he took a gun from his father's home and killed himself. I sat at that funeral alongside teachers, staff, friends, and students, and I will never forget that pain. Thank you for moving forward with this very important resource, and thank all of you for the incredible work that you're doing. You don't deserve the abuse that you're getting. Thank you.
Up now is Amy Bean, followed by Risso Longecker.
They're not going to tell me where I'm going to store my guns. I'll tell you that right now, just so you know.
You say Amy Bean?
I did.
Okay.
Amy, you're up.
All right. Well, I feel very underqualified. I don't have a fiery speech or anything to say tonight as far as that goes. I did look at the agenda for tonight, and I had some questions and just concerns about it, and I think most of you guys know this because I did send an email. I looked on the Arizona School Board Association's website, of which Scottsdale Unified School District is a member. And it says a board's existence is based on the belief that lay control of public education makes schools flexible and responsive to the needs of the local community. I'm concerned about some of the policy changes that have been proposed to the B policies and the fact that it appears to take the center of control away from community members, and it references the district, which isn't defined. And it also appears in some places to take control away from the board members in general and consolidate it with a single individual. So I would like to see more information on these changes, definition of what the district means in these changes. So that was mainly why I was going to speak. And then I did want to say one additional thing that the first speaker brought up was about respecting our police officers and the fact that school materials are teaching our students not to. So I just pulled a little excerpt from a book that my child read in 4th grade, or was assigned to her 4th grade classroom, and it has been officially, I've been told that it is approved as appropriate. So a police officer is interrogating a black man. See, the police know I'm right, Mr. Yao said, taking their interrogation of Hank as evidence that his theory about black people was valid. He was wrong. The only thing it proved was that the police were just like him. The book does not correct this view of police officers, and I don't think that's appropriate for our children. That's all I have to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Up now is Risa Longecker, followed by Patty O'Neill.
Okay. I want to talk about the changes of policy that you are proposing today. I sent a mail today, but nobody answered. Well, my answer was thank you for the email. And I think everybody should aware what are rights. I noticed some of the points that today's board meeting include potentially a very significant change to detriment our parents' community voices on the decisions that this school board takes. I will give you some examples. The board operational goals. These change the focus on the board duties from the community to the district. I have here a meaning, what a board meaning. What it's supposed to be, is in charge of local public school. They base their decision on inputs from families, teachers, superintendent, students, and general public. Nowhere they say about district. Public participation on board meetings, you are talking about the setup and change completely the voice. It is in pro or against the things that you are taking as unduly repetitions or irrelevant. Who it is irrelevant? Okay, it can be also your decisions can be irrelevant for some portion of the community, and we are not making you silence your voice. But you are taking changes to silence our voice. The board powers and responsibilities. Again, that makes change so that the board no longer answer to the will of the people, but to the district. Still, who is the district? In addition, it is a proposal that the board might not be removed a board officer during their terms in office. I wonder why. Unethical behavior will be now not only permitted, but rewarded and covered. I am expecting that a majority of this board completely discharge all this.
Thank you for wrapping up your public comment. Time for Patty O'Neill. Followed by Kane Huzar.
Good evening, Madam Chair Julie Sinadowski and Vice President Libby Hartwells and the rest of the board and Dr. Scott Menzel. Thank you very much. I want to bring a big different tone tonight. I want to thank you. But first, before I do that, I just want to recognize that amazing student, Annalise Jones. This is why we're here. This is why you guys are here, is to have students like that come through and be successful and provide them teachers that were recognized tonight. And so I just want to thank you. We have to remember that you are not paid and you shouldn't have to succumb to this kind of treatment. This month, I think Dr. Menzel mentioned, is National School Board Appreciation Month. And I don't know if anybody knows this, but I found some little factoids of this board and what they've done. So for the 5th consecutive school year, SUSD teacher salaries have gone up 4%. Did you know that? It was this board here, right? At 83, SUSD is honored to have one of Arizona's highest number of national board certified teachers. Thank you for making that happen. 95% of the school year in 2021 was in person. We got the students back in the classroom and made every effort to make sure that they stayed there. And I just want to point out a couple more things highlighting your successes because they just don't get mentioned enough. So 90% of here's a good one, 90% of the human brain growth occurs before the age of 5, which is why the SUSD is adding STEM-focused pre-kindergarten at Navajo Elementary School. Thank you. And that's just to name a few. I'm here to highlight all of your successes.
Time is up. It's time for Kane Huzar, followed by Susan Winder.
Good evening. Congratulations, Julie Silanowski. I would like to acknowledge that out of the 5 board members, you always return my emails, and I want to thank you for that. And in fact, the first time I ever emailed you, you invited me to lunch. I hope that you use that collaboration and that spirit to help heal and build and bring this community together. C.S. Lewis said, the reason for democracy is actually the reverse. Humans are so fallen that no one can be trusted with unchecked powers. Some would argue that parents who choose to come speak before this board to air their grievances and to put checks on your power, that somehow these parents or these community members of the community are being divisive, or that they come to pour gasoline on the district's problems. I'd like to challenge that notion, and I'd like to offer an alternative point of view. The members of this community who come to speak to this board, whether in support of your work or in critique of your work, both perspectives are valid and they are needed. You should know when you get it right, and you should also know when you get it wrong. When parents speak, you should choose to listen and welcome any challenge brought before you that offers feedback about your work. Because we not only have a right, we have an obligation. I have an obligation as a mother to check the work of this board. You represent us, and you answer to us. You answer to the community. That's why we elected you. The only way that we can help correct the wrongs is by allowing those that you represent, the stakeholders, to be a part of the conversation. You must allow the check of your work so that the broken things, Superintendent, may be fixed. We come before this board because you are responsible for the decline in enrollment, for other things, and it is my responsibility to hold you accountable, and it's your responsibility to take ownership of the things that are wrong and are broken. Thank you very much.
Up now is Susan Winder, followed by Tim Curtis.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts. My name is Susan Winder. I'm a retired educator with an advanced degree in curriculum instruction, a taxpayer in your district, and a grandmother to students that attend your middle and high schools. What I'm holding up for you right here tonight are 2 workbooks from the middle school for the iReady program, which was purchased with ESSER money for the purpose of ensuring our students didn't have gaps in learning due to COVID. I have researched this program. It is based on excellent research, and it's actually developed around when this COVID started for the main purpose that you purchased it, to keep the learning gaps not there. And I thank your excellent curriculum department for picking this. Here's the bad news. See these pages? They haven't been started, they haven't been finished. Instead, the teacher, and unfortunately she was given an award tonight, is using this material. My favorite dislike of the page is the one that says YouTube videos where they can go find how to do the things in this package here. I am sure these packages do not correlate with iReady. First off, because they approach it in an entirely different fashion, and at the bottom of that there is no publication, which always publishers put when they have things that can be reproduced. My grandchild got these the first day he went to middle school and was told to take them home and save them. Also applying with this is a book he got this week. No way it's going to be used before the end of the year, and as a matter of fact, he was told to save that one as well. This is very disturbing to me because, number one, this is thousands of dollars that are going to be thrown into the trash. Number two, it's probably going to leave our students with a larger gap in learning than they already had. This week, my grandchild came home to me and said the math teacher had said to him, I'm tired of all these F's and all the emails from the parents. I find it very disturbing that principals will allow this abuse of this excellent curriculum that our tax dollars have paid for, and that you
Thank you for wrapping it up. Tim Curtis is up, followed by Bert Teveld. Again, Tim Curtis, followed by Bert Teveld.
Good evening. I'm Tim Curtis. I'd like to thank you for your public service. After last year, it seems like we've been taking some steps in the right direction. Seems like we've all been so focused on medical science that we lost focus on behavioral science. And that, I think, would have kept us all from creating some of our own problems. So this year, there's no need to spend your time categorizing people and making parent opposition lists. That's behavioral. There's no need to tolerate colleagues that make these lists. That's also behavioral. There's no need to take sides. There's no need to take or to drive a wedge. That's all behavioral. There's no need to overreach or mandate things when you can educate, especially when it comes to people's bodies. It's unmanageable, it's unsustainable, and it's personal. No need to send healthy kids home again, and no need to keep them away. No need to create an animosity. You are very busy with the academic agenda. You've got better things to do, so thank you for your time.
Up now is Bert Teveld, followed by Sarah Dorn.
Good evening. Tomorrow I will not be in my classroom. Instead, I will do my part in shaping a strategic plan for our district, and to ensure that teachers are recognized and supported as the professionals that we are. We know that teachers, together with the school staff and in collaboration with the adults in the lives of our students, form the basis for student success. This is how parent voice counts. I'm able to do this work because a guest teacher, also known as a sub, is in my classroom. Substitutes are not always available. Memes are flying around the internet with jokes about sub shortages, except it is not a joke. In case you forgot, teachers are people too. We get sick, we have emergencies, and we need to take care of ourselves to sustain our service. It is not a viable option to have colleagues covered during their prep time, which happens way too often. So substitute teachers are essential. Please, if you can get a sub license, do. This is how parent voices can make a difference. And then finally, there's the political reality of a financial cliff on March 1st. We, all of us, need to speak up and make sure that archaic 1980 rules do not impact our students now. Call your legislator and urge them to pass the legislation to release the spending cap by March 1st. Parent voice is essential. Community voice is essential. In concert with educational professionals to cover when teachers cannot be there, and as voters who make sure that their voice in support of our public schools is heard at the Capitol. Finally, I was recognized as a National Board Certified Teacher. Thank you. I would like to recognize you as a governing board since you are celebrated this month as well. Thank you for your service. Good night.
Sarah Dorn, followed by Christine Marsh.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Manzel for allowing volunteers back on campus. That is much needed and will be greatly appreciated by the teachers and the parents. I would ask that you rescind one last COVID restriction, the poor elementary school students' lunch. They are still forced to sit 3 to 6 feet apart in assigned seats. These kids have not been able to sit and talk to their friends all year long. In the meantime, both middle and high school lunch can sit crowded together at tables. My middle schooler sits with 15 other children every day at lunch, smushed together, happy as can be. And my poor 5th grader can barely talk to one friend. I've brought this issue up many times over the last few months, and I've been told continuously, well, it's because they can't get vaccinated yet. Well, that time has come and gone. There has been plenty of opportunity for anyone who chooses to get their child vaccinated to do so. So why do we continue to torture our poor elementary school children with these restrictions? And I think you can look at your data. There has been no large outbreak in middle or high school that can be traced back to lunch. So at this point, it just seems like an unnecessary requirement. In addition, one last thing. As I was reading the agenda tonight, I noticed that there are policy changes that are being suggested. And it seems to read to me that it's removing the board's obligation to the people of this district, as well as altering the manner in which public comments are given or even having them be allowed. At this time, when the trust in public institutes is at an all-time low, and I know it's hard to sit up here and listen to people you don't agree with, but having that ability for parents to voice their concerns actually adds to more trust and helps bring our community together. Thank you.
Our final speaker this evening is Christine Marsh.
Good evening, board members, Dr. Menzel, Gladys Wagner, who I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet. I'm State Senator Christine Marsh. I represent a district, a legislative district, which has quite a bit of overlap with Scottsdale Unified. And I've taught in this district for almost my entire career, which is 31 years. As many of you know, schools across our state are currently being threatened by the aggregate expenditure limit, an arbitrary limit on how much our schools could spend that was set in the 1980s. And it's unchanged since then. If we don't override it by March 1st, that's $27 million of already promised and appropriated money here in Scottsdale Unified gone. And I realize that both Dr. Menzel and Bert Tiveld have talked about this, but as I tell my students, sometimes redundancy is necessary. In my 28 years of teaching in Scottsdale, I've seen class sizes rise to unsustainable levels. It used to be that I'd have 150 contacts in a day, which is to say 150 students I'd teach for the entire day. In my last pre-COVID year, I had 185.
Now, instead of moving to bring that number back down, this aggregate expenditure limit threatens to send it flying upwards. That's not even where the problems with this arbitrary limit end. Our schools absolutely must remain open, but without 2/3 of each legislative chamber, many across our state will end up closing. There's a bill I'm running which would provide a one-time override to the aggregate expenditure limit called SCR 1022. I urge you to get in touch with your legislators and urge them to support that bill. Otherwise, school board meetings won't be discussions of curriculum and COVID and the wonderful parents and community input that we've had, but rather it'll be figuring out what getting by looks like.
Thank you for wrapping that up. Thank you. That concludes the public comment section of our governing board meeting this evening. Are there any corrections that any of the governing board members would like to make in regards to misinformation, directions to staff, or superintendent to add to future meetings? I would like to add a few. One of our speakers mentioned the use of our instructional materials. I would really like for us to delve into that a little bit more and make sure that the resources that we are spending to support our students are actually useful materials. And then I would like for there to be a consideration and look at the elementary lunchtime period, because I do value social skills, and I do understand that sometimes kids come to school for those social opportunities, and those include lunch and recess. If there are no other additions, we will be moving on to our information and discussion items. At this time, I will turn this over to Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Sanowski. As you know, we're moving into our budget planning season, and Shannon Crozier, our Chief Financial Officer, is going to present the preliminary budget information for 22-23 with appropriate backup information to explain where we are at this point in time. Shannon.
Vice President Dr. Hart-Wells, members of the board, Dr. Menzel and guest. This evening we are looking at the M&O projections for next year, as well as the district additional assistance and capital override budget projections. First, we take a look at the budget estimates. We started out with a student weight count reduction of 507. Dr. Menzel mentioned this a little bit, and I'll bring it up again. Our student count, or our ADM, is different than student head count. Students that are in AOI, still online programs are based on minutes. So whereas we could have higher head counts, because those are classified by minutes, it affects what our ADM actually looks like. In addition to that, all of our programs have student weights. There's student weights for students in K through 12. There are also additional student weights that affect for Group B weights, which would be like special needs programs. So that being said, when I say reduction of 507, that doesn't mean a reduction of 507 students. It takes a look at what our ADM projections could be for next year with those added student weights, which does amplify that a little bit. The other part I would point out with that is that we're up students this year. We're still getting students back from our pre-COVID years. And so when I'm looking at the budget projections for next year, I'm trying to be conservative, because what I don't want to do is have to come back to the board next year once we get into school and say, we were really off and we've got to cut the budget by millions of dollars. That's not to say that, we could find something different for next year, but we do, when we're looking at these estimates, we try to be conservative of what we're looking at. When I looked at those estimates, what I took was basically where are we right now with our ADM, and what has our average been over the past several years, past 5 years. Again, COVID year being a dramatic cut in what we saw, and so that greatly affects our ADM projections. So I just wanted to kind of put where that was at and why we came up with that number. The great news is that we have an estimated inflation of 2%, so that's what we're projecting right now. That equates to about $88 more per student based off of where or the state estimates for next year. Additionally, more great news is that Arizona State Retirement System has come out with their amounts, and for next year, amazingly, that number is going down, that percentage. That's a savings for the district of about $300,000. That's also a savings for our employees because we both contribute the same percentage. So that percentage will go down to 12.17%. Again, that's exciting news for both us and our employees. So when we look at our projected budget for next year, we have our total student weight count of 26,909 students. Our base level increase of 2% puts us at $4,534. We receive additional funds for teacher experience. Basically what that looks at is what is the experience of the teachers in our district as compared to teachers throughout the state. We have, thankfully, a higher amount of teachers with more experience, and so we get a little bit of additional funding from that. That number has been staying flat. We don't know the actual percentage for next year, but like I said, it's been relatively flat, so we anticipate it staying at that same amount. Additionally, we receive funds for our audit that we do every single year, that's a requirement, and then funds for transportation. Which gets us to our revenue control limit of $133 million. We have passed an M&O override, which is 15% of our revenue control limit, so we estimate that to be $20 million for next year. Continued DSEC funding for $7.3 million. Continued dropout prevention stays the same at $221,000. One thing I'll point out is budget balance carry forward. We have that listed as $15 million. Two things with the budget balance carry forward. One, that is money from this year that will not be, we anticipate not being spent from this year's budget, and so it is budget that we can carry over into next year. It is more than the 6% that the board had approved for a minimum maximum amount for carry forward. A large portion of that is because COVID, and we just didn't spend expenses were down considerably last year. So we're anticipating that being at $15 million, and we're purposefully trying to bring that down. We worked on that within this current year budget, as we need to bring that down. That's too high of a carry forward. And so that plays into the bottom line, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We have water savings transfers. That's pretty much for our performance contracts. And then Prop 123 funds, that's based off of a lawsuit with a settlement with the state that provides all districts with additional funds. We are also looking at continuing to move funds to cash controlled accounts, bringing those balances down. And so therefore, when we look at where we think our budget will be for next year, looking at a budget for this year, we see a change of $514,000. I want to point out that doesn't mean we've overspent our budget. That doesn't mean that we're short budget. What that number comes from is we look at this year's budget and what we think next year's budget will be, and there's a difference of $514,000. Our budget that we carry over into this current year was 16.2. So when we reduce the budget carry forward by $1.2 million, that's going to bring our budget difference down. Again, does not mean we've overspent our budget or are overspending our budget in any way. So when we go into that, we know that between the two differences in budgets, we're $514,000 less for this year. Additionally, we know we have program increases every year that take place. We know that there are certain services that will go up in price, as does, most services. We also know that there may be additional programs or opportunities we want to provide to our schools. That generally is around $100,000, so we factored that in. The great part is we have a savings of $300,000 based off of the state retirement reduction. Additionally, the governing board at the last meeting approved reopening Yavapai. When I say reopening, we never really closed Yavapai, we combined them. So there are some expenses with separating those two schools out again. At the governing board meeting the last time, you will see that amount was $900,000. So if you're wondering, why am I saying 4 when we talked about a different number at the reopening? It's simply because some of those expenses for moving that program are capital expenses, and we're only looking at M&O here. So the M&O portion of it, we anticipate being about $400,000. And then property casualty insurance. That fee is about $2 million per year. It's paid from our self-insurance trust fund. The last 2 years, we have opted not to contribute to that because there is just an excess of cash in that account, and that is one of the accounts we're working to bring down. And so we have chosen not to fund that, but not continuing to not fund it at all means at some point we're going to have a little bit of a cliff when we have to start putting $2 million back into it. So I'm recommending that we fund that at half, which would be $1 million. That's back into the budget since we took it out the past couple of years. So that's why you see that there. So that leaves us at 1.7 deficit that we need to fill the gap on. And so we have a couple things for that. One of them being, like I said, our self-insurance trust account is very flush with cash, more so than what we need. Our self-insurance trust board is talking about setting minimums and maximums. But as a part of that, we believe that we could easily reduce the contribution from the district to health insurance by $1 million. That does not affect our employees. That doesn't change the premiums. It doesn't mean that we're pushing expenses onto employees necessarily. It means that the district itself is not going to fully fund the $11-12 million that we normally put into medical insurance. We'll hold $1 million back, which frees up the $1 million in M&O. Additionally, we have the same thing with workers' compensation. Again, we're trying to reduce those balances. The recommendation would be to limit that contribution from the district, freeing up funds within M&O. And then right now, I talked about we have $15 million in carry forward. That's not money that's just sitting unallocated that we're just not using. That's money that we've used to pay for positions that we just didn't fill, that are vacant positions, or budget items that we budgeted one amount, they came in less. However, we do have $4 million right now sitting in unallocated. And so we would utilize that $4 million sitting in unallocated to then help support with salary adjustments for next year for our staff. As I mentioned, we talked about the cash accounts, and I know Board Member Beckman brought this up a couple months ago when we talked about budgets. So this is just taking a look at where are some of our cash balances. We have more cash accounts than this. These are the cash accounts that are less restrictive and that we can utilize to help offset district costs, which we've done. We've actually, in the past 3 years, moved over $4 million from M&O expenses to these cash accounts. We did not transfer any for this year. This current year, we didn't feel that was necessary. However, we do need to continue to look at bringing those balances down. And so we are recommending that we move $500,000 worth of expenses from M&O over to our indirect cost account, which will continue to bring that down. Some of those balances, we're still looking at. We know that our revenue and Medicaid reimbursements, or MIPS, has gone down of recent, and our expenses have gone up, so that's why I'm cautious not to touch that account. We know our Civic Center has a pretty healthy balance, and that's one we're probably going to have to look at. However, that's an account that schools utilize as well, and so we've been a little hesitant to take from schools something that they're used to seeing, but it is something that we might have to start looking at, is that balance is pretty high. Community education took an extremely hard hit during COVID. They had staff they still had to pay. However, they did not have the revenue coming in that they would typically have in a year. In fact, we used funds last year to help them through that year, as it was a very difficult year for them. So again, they're okay. We think they're going to continue to be okay, and that program will continue to grow. But I just don't recommend at this time putting any additional cost to them. So that's why we really limited it to indirect costs. So we go forward, then we have the district additional assistance. This is essentially capital funds that we receive. We are fully funded through DAW now. So this was the first year that we were fully funded through DAW. Next year will be the next. One of the things with that is DAW is actually based on prior year ADM. So we anticipate our DAW actually going up just a little bit next year because it'll be based off of this year's enrollment, which has actually increased, or the ADM has actually increased. So that's a good thing for our capital programs. And then we have a carry forward of about $3 million for that. So that gives an idea of we're thinking about $13 million for DAW. And then our voters approved a capital override in November of 2016, which started in the 17-18 school year. That is capped at $8.5 million. So that is every year we receive the same amount of money. Additionally, we think at this point, about $2 million will be carried forward on that, giving us about $10.5 million for capital override. One thing I will say about capital is that we have not had a capital 5-year plan in I don't know how long, years. We are currently working on that. We are working on what does that look like, how does that look for our district, and as a continual plan. So we've been working with employees in the district, but also community members on what are the needs of our district. When we start talking about capital, what does that look like for the next couple of years? So we know what do we need and where is it going to land, and so we're better prepared in our budget for capital issues or capital things that we need. So we are still in that process. We will come back in April and talk about the capital plan with a little bit more in depth, but that's essentially where we are with capital. So the last part of this is just, we talked about the M&O. This is the second time bringing up the M&O. We will come back in February, the end of February, to look at proposed salary schedules and employee benefits. In March, we will come back for a tentative M&O approval so that we can move forward, issuing those contracts, move forward with the budget process, and allow schools, when we're ready, to start making those orders for next year, getting their annual orders in. Then in April, we'll come back with the capital tentative budget approval. Again, capital items, you've got to get those orders in early, so we like to get that order, that authority in so that we can start having our schools put those purchases in. And then June is proposed and adopted in public hearing. So we'll have the first meeting in June will be the proposed budget. And then the second meeting, last meeting in June, will be public hearing and then budget adoption. So with that, I'll take any questions.
At this time, do governing board members have any questions, comments? Yes. Board Member Beckman.
Yeah. Can you just briefly touch on the difference between cash on hand and the budget balance carried forward?
Sure. With well, so we have M&O. We receive cash for, but M&O is a budget-driven account. So regardless of the amount of cash we have on hand, we are limited to the budget that is based off of the state legislative amount per student, and so that budget formula, which is utilized by all districts within Arizona. So we are bound by what the budget amount is. If we have way more, if we have millions of dollars more in cash and M&O, it doesn't mean we have more money to spend because we are restricted to the budget limit that plays into it.
Okay, and then you were going to bring forward maybe in April a discussion about the capital override, whether we're going to be this year or just kind of laying stage here for the potential conversation.
Absolutely, we are looking at that. Our capital, what we're looking at, and I think we'll probably bring that back before April. April is when we'll bring back our capital plan for our budget, but I think we'll be back before then to talk about the possibility of if we want to move forward with a budget, capital override in the future. We have our capital override now for 2 more years, but we're looking at, we would definitely need to, if we wanted to continue it, would definitely have to go to vote by November of 23. We're looking at possibly a year early being November of 22 to take that out to voters just so that we know we've got that in place moving forward. So we are collecting data on that. We are putting together, with the capital planning committee, what does that look like so we know when we come forward with wanting to take that out back to our voters for approval, what exactly that would look like and the dollar associated with it. So we are talking about that again, and it will be brought up, I think, before April.
Okay, I appreciate that. One last thing, because I always bring this up, just because there's continual confusion around the cash accounts. Yes. There are 2 spots where we talk about the cash accounts. The first one is in the M&O budget, which is what some of us call the 500 funds. And Shannon brought that forth tonight. Back in 2019, we established those first min and max that you will see, and correct me if I'm wrong, the minimum is 0.25% of an annual year's revenue. The maximum on hand is 2 times the annual year's revenue. So the misconception tends to be if you are over that 2 years or that max, that we're immediately just going to slice off that amount off the top and spend it in the M&O account. That essentially lets us know that that is money that could be identified for other areas, but is not just going to be immediately spent. The other area is the trust account. Cash balances, those are a little bit more tied up. That is not cash over there that you can just use if you run out of money in the M&O and go right over there and use it. That's a considerable, there are 3 accounts in the trust account. There's our workers' compensation, our property casualty, and our medical account, all of which have to be used for certain expenses. Shannon does a great job every year if the M&O is light, like she showed us, that what we can do instead of paying the premiums for something like property casualty, she can not take that premium out of the M&O and just let that premium draw down the cash that's sitting in the property and casualty account over in those 3 cash accounts, if that makes sense. But continually people come to me and say, we have all of this cash on hand over here, why don't we just use it for things inside our budget? And it can't be used for things just inside the M&O budget. But last thing on that, I'm sit on the trust board, so we are working towards bringing forth min and max for those 3 accounts that I just identified in the trust account as well. So the public, from a transparency perspective, would know the maximum amount of cash that we would hold in there before we'd begin to look at using the overage amount to offset other expenses in the M&O. Anything that you need to add about that?
No, I think that that is a great description of what happens. I think the other thing to point out when we're looking at this, yes, we're over on some of these cash accounts and we need to bring the balances down. What I don't want to do is bring all those balances down right away and then have to come back and say, okay, well, now we've taken all this money away, but I've got to put $5 million back into M&O right now because we've used up all of our cash accounts. We also know that there's some fiscal cliffs out there. Prop 123 will end eventually. That's $1 million. We have an M&O override that will again at some point need to be approved if we're going to continue with that funding. I don't want to put us in a spot where I'm now standing up in front of the board or the CFO is standing up in front of the board saying, well, we spent all this cash and now you've got to figure out how to put 15 million or 10 million back into your M&O. That would be really detrimental to the district, and so we're trying to be slow but methodic about how we do it so that it's just not one big funding cliff that hits at one point. We can slowly take expenses to it, but we can slowly move expenses back to when we need an M&O.
Vice President Hartwells.
Thank you, Shannon. Yes. I wanted, if we could, can we go back a few slides to the negative 500,000-ish, that one. So you talked about the prior year, current year change as about $500,000 under. My question is, and thank you for clarifying to the public what that means. What is that? If what we're looking at based on the assumption that the AEL cap, the aggregate expenditure limit cap, will be waived?
Yes, it is. We are making the assumption that it will be waived. If that is not waived, the current school year budget looks dramatically different. This budget looks dramatically different.
So just to remind and make sure I understand, and for clarity for our community of how important this waiver is that all the budget projections you've presented are really based comp to this year or last year. And so this year has the risk of looking drastically different, $27 million lighter, which will have a ripple effect on next year's budget and consequent spending, right?
It would have a ripple effect for years, not just next year. It would ripple through for multiple years.
So we're not talking just a one-year consequence here.
That's correct.
Thank you for clarifying, Shannon. Thanks for all your good work.
Any other comments from the board? Questions? I actually have a few, Shannon, if you would entertain me with this. Can you go over potential healthcare costs for our, that could be potentially altered for our employees and their families, their insurance costs?
So we do not have the rates yet for what next year is looking like, what that potential increase would be. I mean, we know that year after year, the premium rates do go up. We haven't seen what that looks like for next year, so we're not sure at this time what percentage that would be. The district, the past couple of years, the self-insurance trust has absorbed those increases. There are real concerns. I don't want to pass. It's hard to pass those expenses on to employees. That's a hit to their wallet. At the same time, I don't want to get to a point where we've not passed that on for years, and we pass on a sticker shock to employees when we can't continue to absorb it. And that will become a reality at some point where we can't continue to absorb all of those increases. So one of the things we have to look at, and we'll be looking at it with the self-insurance trust as well as with the governing board, is when we have those numbers, and we should have them soon, they're working on them right now. When we have those numbers, what does it look like, and what would be the appropriate balance? If this is another year that we want to absorb those costs, or if we feel like we need to start to, make small changes to that hopefully don't affect as much. Health insurance is expensive, and it's expensive for our district. We've looked at initiatives to try to educate employees as to choices that they can make differently that affects what they have to pay out of pocket, but it affects, we're self-insured, so whatever costs are incurred, we as the district pay for them. So we've looked at education programs on how do we let people know that, maybe this pharmacy charges a little bit more for that drug than this other pharmacy. Do you want to maybe switch to a different pharmacy? Things like that they can do that do that. We also, this year, the Self-Insurance Trust paid for a program called Real Appeal for our employees. The last I checked, which was about a month ago, we had 70 plus employees on it. It's essentially like Weight Watchers through United Healthcare, and so you have a coach, you have weekly sessions that talk about that are encouraging sessions on how to encourage employees through their weight loss management. You can have one-on-one sessions with that coach, and basically it's just tracking what your goal is with weight loss, and the point of that being healthier employees equate to less insurance premiums, and equate to less chance of getting things like diabetes, which is extremely expensive, and other health issues that can be costly for the employee.
That's great. Thank you for bringing that up, and I also want to thank you for creating an understandable presentation on such complex items. So thank you, Shannon.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right, at this time, I would like for us to move on to 7B, and per board policy, governing board members can put forth agenda discussion items. Tonight, we have 2 discussion items. The next 2 were proposed and will be led by governing board members. The first one, 7B, is the first read of changes to B policies, and that is led by Board Member Greenberg.
Thank you, President Sanowski. As mentioned, this is a proposal that I've put forward for several amendments to the B policies, which govern the operations of the governing board itself. As noted in the background information, a number of these amendments or proposed amendments are based on the discussions the board had last year involving items such as how to place items on the agenda, standing advisory committees. As you know, we have our audit committee, but in fact, current board policy would prohibit items like audit committees. And then, of course, proposed or possible changes to open calls to the public. I did manage to write down a number of the concerns that members of the public had raised about these, and I will address those. And I've also been kind of keeping track on our emails as they come in. There seems to be a decent amount of misunderstanding here. As a preliminary matter, the first policy edit is policy BA, school board operation and goals. I just wanted to show here on the screen for everyone Policy BB actually establishes the school board's legal status and makes clear, as is stated in the Constitution and in state law, that school boards are instruments of the Arizona legislature and derive their authority from the Constitution. So there have been these comments that we're supposed to be beholden to the will of the people. That is correct in a philosophical sense, but is actually not how the governing board itself derives its authority. What we've done here in Policy BA, you can see the original struck out language here. Most of these elements are actually incorporated in the new policy. They're just worded differently. For example, the governing board is responsible to the people of the district and should be aware of the opinions and attitudes in the community. Two of our six groups here, 5 groups here, specifically discuss the need to foster the district's relationships with the community, partnerships, and others, and the impact of the district's operations on the community as factors that the governing board is agreeing to consider when making decisions. The policy was broadly taken by general from common law and statutory sources on the duties and obligations of board members in the private sector, but modified given that we are a government board. And so when we talk about the governing board's responsibility is to act in good faith in the best interest of the district as a whole, with the paramount concern being the interests of each student. The district is Scottsdale Unified number 48. That is the organization on which we are board members, or for which we're board members. And our obligation really is to make decisions in the best interests of the district as a whole. I think what I believe the implied concept is that the governing board is supposed to simply do whatever a majority of the community demands that we do, or at least the loudest portion of our community demands that we do. And that is wrong, I would argue, philosophically, but also incorrect in terms of our legal obligations. We do have to follow Arizona law. We cannot discriminate against student clubs and students of, from minority groups like the LGBTQ community. So our decisions really are made in the best interest of the district as a whole. And here, as I mentioned, are just kind of the factors that I've pulled from various sources that we would be essentially agreeing to among ourselves to consider when making decisions, like the long-term impact. Again, long-term impact is actually listed here in the original language. District needs and to require short and long-range strategies that are responsive within the budgetary limitations, interests of the district students, interests of the district's employees, the community, and of course, our academic and extracurricular standards. So that's really the change to Policy BA. It's just a more beefed up version that doesn't simply focus on the opinions and attitudes of our community, but actually expands what we're looking at to a greater portion of stakeholders in our district. Are there any questions or comments about this?
Vice President Hartwells.
Thank you. Board Member Greenberg, so just so I understand the context for, and we're talking solely about Policy BA, the proposed amendments. At least that's what I'm looking at. But I want to understand the context of what you just described. Your proposed amendments are drawn from a variety of sources that are predominantly rooted in common law and statute. And then you did make a comment about also looking at other operational goals for boards in the private sector. Is that an accurate summary of where you indicated you drew information from to arrive at the proposal in front of us?
Yeah, that's for Policy BA. That is accurate. Generally speaking, if you are a board member in the private sector, you owe a duty of good faith to act in the best interests of your organization as a whole, and you owe a duty of loyalty to your organization as well. That doesn't really apply here because the duty of loyalty is mainly has to do with taking business opportunities away from your own company, et cetera. So this is really the primary focus is the former, acting in the best interest of the organization as a whole.
Thank you for clarifying.
Any other comments on this first read and discussion on policy BA? Nope. I would just like to add here that, as a reminder, we as governing board members are actually responsible for the decisions made for the district.
Yeah, that's correct, Board President Snowski. Again, this is really just expanding more on the concept of school board operational goals. Because we had already discussed reviewing, I think, 4 or 5 of these policies already. I just chose to kind of give a glance at the remaining ones to see if there are any updates we can make. And I felt that the existing language in this policy was not in line with, what we actually do on a day-to-day basis as board members.
All right, at this time, can you lead us in your thoughts on policy BBAA?
Yes. Or BBA, policy
yes,
BBA.
BBA.
Let me pull that up. Because in part, policy BBA seemed to be repetitive of policy BA concerning our powers and responsibilities. In policy BBA, the introduction paragraph makes reference to carrying out the will of the people in the district in the matter of public education. That isn't actually what the board does. We carry out our duties and obligations pursuant to the law, which are set out in statute, Arizona Revised Statute Section 153021 in sequence. I know the board is very familiar. I believe it's 341 and 342 set out I believe it's 341, 342 set out the actual duties and matters over which we make decisions. Those duties and powers and responsibilities are set out pretty explicitly in statute. So it's not simply, again, if 51% or everyone in our district, the will of the people being vague and ambiguous, wanted us to do something that was absolutely illegal or not a power that has been accorded to us by statute or the Arizona Constitution, we could not carry out that will at all. So I felt that this change brought us again in line with the legal requirements that we're bound to. Then down here we have the duties and obligations that exist currently in the policy, things like to become familiar with the state school laws, regulations, general knowledge of educational aims and objectives. I struck that out in part because I believe that's pretty much incorporated in policy BA in terms of how we make decisions. But at the same time, as I mentioned, we are a government board. We are elected officials. And so some of these don't really balance in that, to vote and act in board meetings impartially for the good of the district and to accept the will of the majority vote. It may be that as an elected official, you don't agree with the majority vote on a decision, especially, obviously, if the majority of the board votes to do something, the board is going to do it legally. But as a minority voter, you may not support that, and to be forced to publicly support that seems out of line with balancing the interests of, elected officials and the board itself. So I felt that some of those were just not in keeping with how things, again, are actually done on a day-to-day basis. Are there any questions or comments?
Board members, Vice President Hartwells, do you have your request on? No? No, okay. Any other board members have comments? Just to note, in BBA, it appears that you have shifted some of these topics to BA, and I just want to note that the interests, as it states, the interests, our actions should be based on law and the interests and well-being of our students that we serve. So can you, Board Member Greenberg, move on to BBAA at this time?
Absolutely. And just a reminder to our public, absolutely no vote is being taken tonight. This is a first read, and oftentimes we may have a third read even if further changes are recommended after the second read. So if any board members do have any thoughts after this meeting over the next couple of weeks, and they would like to change things or propose, alternatives, please feel free to email me or Gladys or Lori, and those can be incorporated into any proposal. Moving on to BBAA. This is really just a strike through. This policy seemed a little strangely worded in terms of being board member authority and responsibilities. We have this entire section about board member requests for information, and what we've actually done is move that into a new policy known as policy BCC. I know that the administration had raised some questions about how this policy should be balanced, especially if there is a request by an individual for more than 2 hours of staff work, how the board can then step in, and that is addressed in policy BCC, the new policy, as I will show later. So no real change here other than moving this language into a new policy.
Can you repeat that last bit, Board Member Greenberg, about having it shifted into BCC?
Yeah, I'll show you here, policy BCC. Let me just pop it up so the public can see what I'm talking about. This is the new policy proposed, and this policy covers requests for information in a little bit more detail than we have here, and creates a system so that if a request is over 2 hours, would require over 2 hours of staff work, the superintendent is permitted to deny the request, but the request will be placed on as an action item or a consent agenda item, so that the governing board member has the opportunity to explain the basis and why the information is needed, and then the board can weigh in as to whether, as a whole, can weigh in as to whether that is a good use of staff time and that information would be helpful to resolving a matter that the board is facing.
Thank you. Board Member Beckman, comment?
This comment was really for
Your microphone.
This comment really was for your previous comments. I think it's important also to note that the board received these and the red line versions less than 24 hours ago. This is quite comprehensive, and since I say routinely I don't play lawyer, I would like some time with this. I'm happy that it's a first read, but to sit down with the district's legal counsel and get questions answered that I have personally about this. But I just wanted to make that note for the public and the people that have emailed that we did just receive this yesterday. And while we may have questions, Board Member Greenberg, we might not be prepared to ask them tonight. So just
okay. Well, I would just like to make clear that I did provide. I personally don't know why. I think the reason why that these weren't provided sooner was simply because there was some cleanup being done. But our board counsel, in order for a board member to propose board revisions before they're placed on the agenda, they do have to be reviewed by the district's council per board policy. So that was done. None of this none of this is being discussed without legal counsel review and making sure that it is both legal under state and federal law. But of course, this is a first read, and you will have plenty of time to ask your questions of counsel over the coming weeks.
All right, thank you. Can we move on to BDA, please?
Yes. Policy BDA. Board organizational meeting. This concerns the election of president and vice president and when a vacancy occurs. First of all, it the existing policy started off with kind of an odd system where if the board president is not present for a meeting or for the first meeting of the year, the organizational meeting, that there would just be a temporary election by the board. That doesn't really make sense because the board would have to have a meeting to then appoint a temporary president to then commence the other meeting. So instead, this was changed that if the board president is no longer a member of the board or is not president, the vice president would automatically assume that responsibility. But if the vice president is also not a member of the board, a temporary chairperson would simply be appointed by the superintendent, and that enables the meeting to proceed without having to go through all these additional elections to elect, essentially. Board officer vacancy, the same thing here. If the board president, the current language, as you can see, is whenever there's a vacancy in the office of president, the board shall elect a new officer. That doesn't make sense since we have a vice president. The traditional order of things is that the vice president would then assume that responsibility, and then a new vice president would be selected. So that's been changed. We've also received questions about the board officer removal provision. As a reminder to the public, board members can't be removed from office. They can only be removed if they are removed under the grounds stated in Arizona statute. Absent those grounds, though, the governing board itself cannot remove a board member from office. They can remove a board member from their position as president or vice president. The issue here was that, on the one hand, yes, in general, in the private sector, you may have a removal for no cause. On the other hand, if you remove somebody for cause, they're generally afforded due process and some system to challenge that. We have no ability to really enforce that type of system. So instead, unless there's a vacancy, again, for one of the reasons grounded in Arizona state law, the view is taken that the president or vice president should simply remain in their office during their term, unless, of course, they choose to leave or not. So again, as a reminder, the governing board cannot remove a governing board member from the board. That's not something the board can do. And so emails to that effect that the board should be able to do that and remain being able to do that is just not something we've ever had the power to do.
Any comments from board members? I will note I have some concerns with this particular one, and I think there are some improvements here as well. So I look forward to bringing this into additional discussion.
Sure. Moving on to BDE. Board committees, as mentioned, one of the issues currently is that the board cannot have standing committees like the audit committee. We did have a policy BDF that did discuss advisory committees. Basically, what I've done here is I've taken the language from that policy BDF on advisory committees, moved it into policy BDE on board committees, and then simply made it so that board committees can exist as standing committees like the audit committee. And as you'll see here, because it is a board committee, it must follow open meeting law, and that is stated here as well. I know that's a concern that board members have raised in the past about superintendent and board committees, how information from those committees is shared. It is a legal requirement that board committees follow open meeting law, so that means there's an agenda issue, minutes are taken, those minutes are approved and posted publicly for the public to access, meetings are open to the public so that the public can attend them, and all of that good stuff. So that's really the only change here, is that policy BDE now allows board committees, and policy BDF, which was all of this language, is no longer applicable as superfluous and is proposed to be removed.
Any comments from my colleague board members? Thank you for clarifying the issue of quorum and open meeting law. I appreciate that, because that was a question that I had with this.
Sure. Policy BEDB. Pretty minor changes. Public comment, the term public comment has been changed to open call to the public, which is how it is legally referred to in Arizona statute. And these matters, non-agenda items and all that, we no longer have that distinction between non-agenda items and agenda items and consent agenda items and differences in time when people can speak. So that language is just struck as it's no longer applicable. In addition, it's proposed that the president and superintendent can amend the matters of business on agenda items, pursuant to Arizona law. Obviously, open meeting law always has to be complied with. What that basically means is, for example, we sometimes have public hearings followed by a special meeting, followed by executive sessions and additional, and all in the same day, all in a row. And so there are some items that may not be necessary. For example, we might not need to do the Pledge of Allegiance 3 times in a row. We might not need to have superintendent comments one night because the superintendent might not have any comments to make. We might not have anything on the consent agenda, etc. So this is just saying basically what we already do. The superintendent and president do not need to have every single one of these items on the agenda, for either because there's nothing to be put on that agenda, or it needs to be pulled, or what have you, and moved to a different item, or it's repetitive and superfluous. So that's really just the only proposal with BEDB. I will note, however, that the board members have raised the question as to whether open calls to the public should be removed altogether. So that proposal was agendized tonight. If there's any discussion at this time as to that point. So if you look at the information discussion item for policy BEDB, it does say, as an alternative, the board may discuss removing open calls to the public altogether. So that was put in there because that was specifically requested.
Board members, any comments? Again, I would like to ask for clarification from Board Member Greenberg and possibly Board Member Beckman with the past experience with the agendas as they're set. As I was going through this, I'm looking, and the format is so different in the policy versus what the format that we practice. So I wonder if anyone could explain how we ended up with what we have, where it's A, B, C, D, 2, or we have 1, and then we have 2, A, B, and then we go through 13, or 3 through 13, versus a clear letter delineation of the progress through the agenda.
Board President Sanowski, I've always known agendas, when they're actually printed out, to use a numeric system. And we could actually amend this policy to use a numeric system so that it matches, it aligns. But, in general, my feeling or my experience has been is sometimes there's a level of inflexibility in what the board president and superintendent can do before a board meeting. Concerns about, for example, if we need to get a couple items out right off the bat, maybe we need to have item J, action items, right after approval of agenda. Well, currently under the policy, that can't be changed unless, as you see here, unless changed by the governing board at the meeting, which means that we then have to take a vote and have that discussion on the approval of the agenda. So this is just hopefully a way to kind of fast track the efficient agendizing of items.
Board Member Beckman?
Board Member Greenberg is correct. That's the way I always remember it, that any changes.
Your mic.
Gosh, my mic's off. Board Member Greenberg is correct that any changes to the agenda are at the top of the meeting voted on. And that's the way I remember it, and that's the way I think it should stay. But I appreciate the discussion.
Thank you. Board Member Greenberg, can you proceed?
Yes. Following BEDB, we have BEDBA. This is about agenda preparation and dissemination. Currently, we have a policy that if a board member requests that an item be placed on the agenda, all they have to do is notify the superintendent 5 business days or 5 working days before the meeting, and it must be placed on the agenda. That is not how things have been done in the past. As I remember from my first 2 years being on the governing board, it was extremely difficult to get pretty much anything on the agenda as not the president or superintendent. This changes it though, because that doesn't really work either. If anyone could put anything on the agenda 5 working days beforehand, then all 5 board members could each submit 5 different things, and our board meetings would be 10 hours long. This creates a system that I think is a workable system, and of course happy and open to changes. But the requested items here would have to be placed on the agenda unless additional information is required, in which case there's a 45-day working time to put the item on the agenda. And 45 days is about, 3 to 4 board meetings, depending on, kind of how the calendar is falling. That's quite a lot of time to review the matter, get any information needed to put the matter on the agenda, and potentially resolve the matter off the agenda, allowing the board member to withdraw the request before it ever needs to even hit the board agenda. But this just creates a fail-safe that prevents a board president or superintendent from shutting out an item that a board member wishes to discuss.
Board members, any comments? Governing Board Member Greenberg, can you look where it says governing board member, and it should say the word may, I believe. It was your intent, withdraw the request at any time. I think there's a exclusionary
Yes.
typo.
Yeah, the board member, yes, the board member may withdraw the request at any time.
Yep.
Correct. Good eye.
Have 2 of them. How about BEDD?
Policy BEDD. This was a pretty minor change proposal saying that the board president may implement and enforce such other rules or order as may be deemed necessary for the orderly and efficient operation of the meeting. What we're really looking at here is changes that the board president may want to impose on the board itself in terms of the conduct of the meeting. For example, if you look to Robert's Rules of Order, in the simplified form in general, a board member is only permitted to speak once on a specific item, as an example. So perhaps if the agenda is very full, the board president may wish to state that they will only be taking comments from each, 1 comment from each board member on each item, as opposed to what we sometimes have, or what we often have, which is, a back and forth discussion between board members. So those types of impositions may or may not be necessary, but it could depend on how full an agenda is and how much business the district needs to go through. Again, we're always looking to have efficient meetings. That was one of the things that the board has been very clear about, that they want efficient meetings, and this is just another tool for how that can be done.
I do not see there any questions or comments. So can you proceed to BEDH?
Yes, policy BEDH. This is our public participation at board meetings. Again, this is stemmed from the discussion we had as a board last year, where proposals were desired to see what additional changes could be made to the policy to make our board meetings more efficient. One change here is proposed that only interested parties are permitted to speak at our board meetings. Interested parties are, as you can see here, persons who live within the district, are parents or guardians of students who attend a district school or use a district service, are students who attend a district school or use a district service, or are employees of the district. That's, as far as I can figure, pretty much any any interested party, and pretty much everyone who speaks at our board meetings. The only people who would not be able to speak at our board meetings on this policy are really people who have absolutely no connection to our district whatsoever, don't live in it, don't attend it, don't have family that attend it, aren't employees here. And we do have some commercial organizations, as you all know, that have been sending people to come and speak at our board meetings. And I'm not sure that's something we want to continue happening, because it is a distraction and pretty inefficient use of our time when we are trying to hear from members of the public who we do want to listen to, members of our community that we do want to listen to and discuss. Our council wanted me to note that the Attorney General's Office for Arizona cautions against the use of these types of restrictions, but they don't provide any citation other than to say, it's not against Arizona law, but they caution against it, is my understanding. Federal district courts and circuit courts that have dealt with this have upheld these types of restrictions. Again, our meetings are meetings open to the public. They're not public meetings. So generally speaking, in terms of trying to maintain an efficient board meeting, these types of restrictions are held so long as we don't discriminate among interested parties. An example being, one district had a policy that allowed teachers who lived in the district to speak during public comment, but prohibited teachers who did not live in the district to speak during public comment. That would not be permissible, but this broadly falls in line with those types of restrictions that have been upheld. Another change is, possible change would be that people can only comment on issues within the jurisdiction of the governing board itself. So, for example, if somebody wished to come to a board meeting and decry actions taken by the country of Spain, that is not something within the jurisdiction of the governing board, and there's no reason for us to listen to that in general, again, in terms of an efficient meeting. The questions of fact asked by the public, when appropriate, will be answered by the president or referred. That language has simply been moved here, and this language is taken directly from statute. At the conclusion of an open call to the public, individual members of the public body may respond to criticism, may ask staff to review a matter, or may ask that a matter be put on a future agenda. Those are the legal limitations that we have, and so that has just been pulled from statute. The other possible proposal put forward are changes to the president's implementation of reasonable time, manner, and place restrictions, including setting an overall time limit on the length of the comment period. That is something that we've already experienced on a couple of board meetings. Setting a time limit for individual speakers, we already do that, and requiring that comments be limited to matters listed on the agenda. We don't currently do that, but this would allow you to specifically state at this board meeting, we're only going to take comments having to do with items on the agenda itself, and any items off the agenda we're not going to be listening to that night. In addition, there are restrictions that the Ninth Circuit, which is what we are in Arizona, has identified that we can end an individual's comment period if the individual's comment disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of the board's meeting. We saw a couple of those types of public comments tonight, and the board president acted appropriately. We also have, including without limitation, if an individual's comment becomes unduly repetitious or is extending a discussion that is irrelevant or falls outside the jurisdiction. So again, these are actions that the board president, as the person presiding over these, can take action on. And again, we saw some of that play out tonight already. And then finally, the personal attacks language. I've never really been a fan personally of this language. I already changed it once to we used to have a prohibition, which I argued was unconstitutional. Courts have upheld the rule that you can't personally attack people, but I think in general it's frowned upon as a possible content restriction or viewpoint restriction on a public speaker. So I personally took that out and instead just pushed this down to policies KE and KB are for dealing with complaints. again, this is a discussion that a couple board members, including myself, wanted to have. I think tonight is a good example of why this discussion needs to occur. We received as a board an email from a 7th grade student, as you all know, who wanted to come and speak tonight, but noted, and I'll just quote that I wanted to speak about it and put some minds at ease at the next board meeting. But I was then informed of the backlash speakers can receive when they go up there. I would be okay with the backlash I would receive on campus from my peers, but I have a younger brother and I don't want him to receive the same treatment, so I will not be speaking. And that's from a 7th grade student in our district, and I think that's a pretty unacceptable position for our district to be in, that students, especially students in families from minority populations like the LGBTQ community or the refugee community, don't feel safe or comfortable speaking at our public board meetings because of the actions of other adults in the room. I don't know, frankly, what the appropriate level of restriction is on public comments. We've now seen public comments turn into a place where third parties use them for commercial purposes. They come up, they speak, they get their 1-minute video, and then they post online to raise money for purposes that are entirely at odds with the purposes and mission and our values as a district. If you look at other areas, other nations, if you look to Parliament, you're not allowed to do that. But in our country, you are allowed to do that. I just question whether that's really a valuable use of our time to allow people to come and use our board meetings for their own commercial gain. That seems wrong to me, and not what the purpose of public comments are. I personally, at this point, given some of the pretty gruesome anti-Semitic and homophobic comments that we hear on a routine basis, would not be opposed to getting rid of public comment altogether.
I note that we have comments from another board member, Mr.
Yeah,
Kramer.
that's fine. I'm wrapping up.
Okay.
Sorry. This one happened to be in depth because board members wanted to discuss this. So I put the proposal out there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I note there's a request to speak from board member Lindsay.
Yeah, I'd just like to hear the thoughts of Dr. Menzel or Lori on these proposals.
Is your mic on?
Should be.
Yeah, yes it is. Dr. Menzel, any comments?
Who's going to comment first?
Council Bird?
Board Member Greenberg is correct. This one is not on. That should be better. Board Member Greenberg is correct. I have taken a look at these. I haven't gone line by line. I will tell you that overall, they are in compliance with state and federal law. That's not always where attorney advice ends, but I will tell you that for the most part, they are in compliance with state and federal law, as I understand it. There is much here for discussion, and so if you would like, certainly, perhaps now is not the appropriate time since you're not taking any action at this particular meeting, but certainly it would be appropriate for an executive session or for further legal review. And I'm happy to answer any legal concerns that you have. If you just get me those questions, I can then get those specific legal concerns answered and out to all of the board members.
Noted, and thank you. Superintendent Menzel?
I concur with Lori Bird in terms of the amount of policies to review here. The only other thing that I wanted to ask as it relates to the policy review process, first I want to say it's one of the primary roles of the governing board is to establish policy. It directs the function of the organization, and it's of critical importance. It can also be very tedious. Sometimes some people might say boring, a good soporific to put you to sleep if you need, but it's really important. My question is, a different one, and that is the trust, who we work with on a number of things, is launching a new policy service, and they expect to be able to launch that this spring. And I wonder whether or not we should tap the brakes just a little bit to explore whether or not we're going to continue on the path with the current policy service we have, or if maybe it might make sense to have a clean slate and start with the trust for a couple of reasons. One, our policies as they currently exist are a product of time. So you had the first policy adoption in the early 2000s, then you've had modifications over time based on statutory changes. Some things get changed in a timely basis. Sometimes, depending on the board and the context, they didn't get changed, and so the amount of policies we have may not all be current or relevant. So the idea that we might be able to work with a new policy company with lawyers that we already work with to establish a base set of policies has some appeal from my perspective to look at. I'm not saying we should make the move. I think we should investigate the move. There are some other things about how they're approaching it that appeal to me, and Lori and I have discussed this. One, this lettering system is confusing as all get out. It's not logical, so a numbering system, which is what I'm accustomed to, makes it easier to follow. Then when you add, it's easy to add in a way that makes sense versus which letter do I put next. And I mean, I get the alphabet works in a logical way too, but it's still not as easy to follow. Secondly, if you start fresh, you start with the policies that are the most important from a compliance standpoint and reflecting the organization's priorities. There are a lot of things here that would consume a lot of time if we're going to try to fix all of them. I do think that looking at board governance policies is a really good place to start because it really does address how the governing board functions, roles, responsibilities, and priorities. But I just wonder, I have a meeting on Friday with representatives from the trust. We'll learn more about what their timeline is for this spring. But I just wonder if, before we delve into too many policy changes, if the board has any interest in considering an alternative provider and then jumping into the details.
And I just have one more thing to add. I also did go and look at the policies from any number of districts, just kind of a random. Obviously, I didn't go down the whole list on ASBA. That's a really long list, but I tried to do districts of comparable size and in our area. And I will say that there is not necessarily although there is somewhat a uniformity of policy, but it's not equal. There are other ways as well through either regulation or on your comment form yourself, which is labeled as E. So if you have, policy BDE, you'll have BDEE, which will be an exhibit. BDER will be a regulation. So there are also a number of ways to address the concerns of the board through other mechanisms, the policy as well, although I do want to stress that I haven't found anything in these that is illegal or would be contrary to statute, except for the one area that Board Member Greenberg and I have discussed that would require a little bit more exploration in terms of limiting who can see.
Thank you, Counselor. Board Member Lindsay.
Yeah, this is more for Dr. Menzel, I guess. When were these given to us, the red line version?
To the governing board today?
They were today, right?
Well, those were posted this morning.
Okay.
So the summary was sent out ahead of time, but the red line was this morning.
We got the summary yesterday.
Yes.
We didn't get these today.
Correct.
And the only reason that I found out that these were available was from a parent. And I just haven't had time to go through them. I need more than 6 or 7 hours to read all of this.
And I will take some responsibility for that, as Board Member Greenberg noted. It wasn't wording changes, it was format changes to the policies, and I'll be honest with you, I just did not get to them until yesterday in order to make those format changes that needed to be made appropriately.
Vice President Hartwells.
Thank you. I wanted to say I appreciate all the effort that has gone into a big picture view of the B policies. I will admit, I also have not made my standard critical review of these policies, and of course, I would like to reserve the opportunity to comment substantively after I do that. And I have not had time to do that. My apologies. However, given the importance of the content and the proposed changes and the merit for considering them, I too would like to reserve the right for a bit more time to digest and have a conversation with council. But I do appreciate the effort. Thank you.
Yes, of course. I appreciate this discussion as well, and I believe that completes this discussion item.
Board President Sanowski, if I may just quickly say thank you for the opportunity to do this. I want to be very clear, though, that a number of these policy changes or proposals came about specifically because of discussions that the board has already had and asked that we explore. And I'm a little concerned that the position is that we request that a board member or somebody or council like Lori Bird take the time to do this work, and then every time we bring it up, especially because there is a second read, so every board member has the opportunity to read this in depth over the next few weeks and discuss it with council and discuss it with whomever, that the position may end up being that we're just going to delay and delay and delay for some other thing. So I want to caution against that, because board policy is our number one responsibility, and I would rather not do all this work on a repeated basis if the board's position is well, they want to have these discussions, we're never going to actually have them. So I just want to point that out.
Thank you. Board Member Hartwells.
I just want to reiterate, I don't think the intent is for anyone to try to drag our feet, but it is a weighty issue, and there have been, I have not kept track, so I've not been able to keep up with the email today, but there have been a number of communications from the community, and I think it is incumbent upon us to take those into account and into consideration. And that's appropriate for all of us to do so. But again, I appreciate the proposal. I recognize that some of these proposals have been in the kind of reducing to writing some of the comments that have been made. But nonetheless, this is still extremely important, and we should give it the attention it deserves. Thank you.
Absolutely. And before we move on to information discussion item 7C, it has been requested that we take a bathroom break.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion to recess for 5 minutes?
Yes, a second?
Second.
All right, I heard a second from Board Member Beckman. We will return here at 8:26 p.m. We'll reconvene our regular meeting. The time is 8:29 p.m. At this point, we will move on to discussion item 7C, social, emotional, and mental health of students and staff, led by Vice President Hart-Wells.
Thank you, President Sanowski. At first, I'd like to start by sharing some gratitude to each of you, I'm not sure what camera this is, but to each of you that are a part of our SUSD community. I want to say thank you. Regardless of what hat or hats you wear in our community, you are valued and you are valuable. And I want to extend a special thank you to those of you that helped inform this discussion item and its contents really over the last several months. In the last couple of weeks, there's been more intense conversations, but this has been several months in the making for me. And specifically, those folks include district staff, principals, program representatives, both internal and external to SUSD, police officers, and parents. And as you all know, our current reality in 2022 has underscored what has always been the case, the importance, if not the criticalness, of emotional, social, and mental health well-being at all ages for all of us. While fewer children and youth may have gotten seriously ill with COVID-19 compared to adults, the pandemic has had major impacts on their lives. Like adults, they are dealing with new challenges, changes in routine, changes in health care, a sense of vulnerability in both safety and security. And let's be clear, these factors existed before the pandemic, but they have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And it took a respiratory plague for us to put social, emotional, and mental well-being into focus for all of us. Actions have been taken by the district, particularly recently, as, for example, what Dr. Menzel mentioned. And I recognize and applaud the decision to make tomorrow's district PD offerings optional for our staff. So in the last year or so, or more, we've used the word resilience quite a bit. And it's usually used in a crisis. But this evening, I want to offer a bit of a different perspective on resiliency. A broader scope, actually, so to speak, and that's organizational resilience. A recent global report published by McKinsey & Company was directed to organizational resiliency. They describe it as the ability of an organization to stay one step ahead of circumstances and to follow through. Put differently, vivid foresight and visible follow-through. And what does that look like? Putting in place infrastructure systems that prevent or at least mitigate against serious impacts of crises. So to that end, the items that are in the discussion item this evening are directed to strengthening the systems that are already in place that mitigate against one of, if not the most serious, negative impacts of emotional, social, and mental distress, and that is suicide. The Office of the Attorney General of Arizona's website refers to suicide in the following way, quote, "Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem." As detailed in the discussion items, their information further provides that 4 out of 5 teens who commit suicide have given early warning signs, and advocates that the time for hard yet open conversations on suicide is now. In a recent informal but candid discussion I had with a representative of the prevention program at Arizona Teen Lifeline, I learned that while suicidal ideation of teens and young children in elementary school, had always been a problem, the pandemic is driving an increase at all age levels due to anxiety, depression, and isolation. I asked, "What did you suggest?" And she said, "Training." Parents, teachers, coaches are often the adults in these kids' lives to whom they feel comfortable speaking. But most of us and I'll include myself in this category, are not well equipped with the tools to identify or head off where these roads of anxiety, depression, and isolation can lead, as we heard a parent testify to this evening. These observations are consistent with the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center's 2019 report, which advocates for proactive intervention to identify risk of violence or unwanted behaviors based on a comprehensive, targeted violence prevention plan that includes exploring access to weapons. It should be noted that in Arizona between 2015 to 2017, over 70% of the deaths by firearms were suicides. This report, the Secret Service report, published in 2019, makes clear schools, parents, and law enforcement must work together to prevent a child in distress from being able to access weapons. SUSD has a long history of collaborating with the City of Scottsdale and the City of Phoenix police departments and their school resource officers. A couple of comments just in response to the comments that were made in public comment, and that was one, the thought exchange that was sent out, and Dr. Sackos, please correct me if I'm wrong, that thought exchange was sent out because the intergovernmental agreement, which is referred to often as an IGA, with the City of Scottsdale Police Department for our SROs is up for renewal soon. And the conversation has taken an approach that is informed by our current realities. The Crisis K-9 program is an example of that type of collaboration, healthy collaboration, that we expect to continue, if not strengthen. That was the point. That's my understanding of the point of the thought exchange, is to get community input on how to strengthen that collaboration. So in the same vein of working together with parents and law enforcement to prevent access to a different type of weapon, the discussion item includes a contemplation of addressing unintentional suicides by counterfeit pills that are laced with lethal doses of fentanyl. Illegal fentanyl availability and access using social media as a means of distribution is increasing at an alarming rate. And further, illegal fentanyl is increasingly found in lethal doses, leading to unintentional overdoses among teens and adults, the severity of which has prompted the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, in collaboration with local law enforcement, to launch an educational campaign called The One Pill Can Kill to combat the ready access to counterfeit pills laced with lethal amounts of illegal fentanyl, as evidenced by the very recent seizure in Scottsdale of a record number of fentanyl-laced pills by law enforcement, in which nearly half of the counterfeit pills contained lethal doses of fentanyl. Part of any successful prevention of negative impacts, a big part of organizational resiliency, is to positively reward and reinforce. And for that reason, the discussion item also contemplates a report be requested that is directed to the existing frameworks that are in place at some of our campuses in order to identify best practices, corresponding costs, and to understand what of those best practices could be scaled for the benefits of students and staff. So in order to address, at least in part, this is a list of items that are directed predominantly towards suicide, as I indicated, which is only one of the negative health and safety impacts on our students, staff, and families. The confluence of the factors that COVID have continued to have on the academic growth and performance of our students, as well as to foster a supportive community. I ask that my colleagues to consider a request of the district administration to provide updates on the existing frameworks that support the mental, social, and emotional health of students and staff, as detailed in the agenda item, for which I have tried to make some cross references to context for you. And with that, I look forward to any discussion or questions you might have. Thank you.
Board Member Beckman.
Vice President Hartwell. I appreciate you bringing forth a topic that's of extraordinary importance to our community. As we recall, our number one priority is to educate kids. But I think we all recognize if those kids are at a deficit, whether it's through emotional issues at home, etc., things, they can't quite get there. They won't be prepared to receive the academic excellence that we're trying to provide. So I know that through the years that I've been in the district and worked on the board, we have many different vendors, organizations, et cetera, that we've worked with to help those children get to that kind of baseline starting point to receive the academic excellence. For instance, we work with Unitown, Challenge Day, Katie McPherson, Not My Kid, trainings by the Scottsdale Police Department, Jewish and Family and Children's Services, many, 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 including having a tiered system where it has a tier 1, 2, and 3 with extra supports. So I'm curious, and again, I appreciate the spotlight you're putting on this because it's very needed. When you sat down and had your discussions about what we're currently doing, where do you feel we need extra support? So when you're coming to the board, and I read your proposal, where do you feel the emphasis should be primarily beyond what we're currently doing? Or are we strengthening that?
May I respond?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
This is your topic.
I just breach any protocol there. Thank you, Board Member Beckman, for your comments, your observations, and in agreeing. This is critically important. It is, social emotional mental well-being is synergistic with academic performance, and I think we all do agree with that notion. So the question was, in my conversations, kind of what did I take away as where we might be able to augment or do something different. I appreciate, first let me comment, you listed a handful of collaborators, and that is exactly what this proposal is drawn to, is let's do more of that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have some great organizations and a great collaboration with our law enforcement partners to address our current realities. And that was the conversation kind of distilled into, in 2022, January, looks a little different than it did in January of 2019 or January 2018. And it's a rethink, a recalibration of how we think about support for our student and staff. So that's an important component here, is not just students, be it staff. Great organizations, I think we've all probably read the Good to Great books, are comprised of outstanding people. And it's really hard to be an outstanding person in your job when you too are suffering from anxiety, isolation, depression. In our circumstances, as a community and as a state and as a country, I don't have to tell any of you, we're all living it, have been very taxing. And the kids are picking up on that. One of the observations that was provided to me by in one of my informational interviews was that the kids are picking up on that, and that's driving some of their isolation, is that they observe that perhaps the people in their lives who function as mentors for them are so overburdened that conversation, those conversations that could be healthy outlets, let's say 2 years ago, maybe aren't available because they don't want to burden out of love and compassion that adult. And that's hard to hear. And I don't know if you are surprised by that, but I was surprised by that observation. And that's by someone in a position to make those observations, which I am not, which is why I drew on a lot of other people's expertise, because this is not something I know a lot about. I've learned a lot as a parent, and I'm grateful that there are these organizations out there that are available to help and have better knowledge and how to guide us, which is where the mandatory training expansion consideration came from. That's actually already, as you know, required of neighborhood schools under state law. So that's something the district already does. and to broaden. And the reason was for that conversation with the Arizona Teen Lifeline, which is basically a crisis hotline, if you're not familiar. And the district has collaborations with some of the, and uses some of those programs. The back of the student IDs, I know some of the high schools have the crisis hotline number on them, and they should. That's exactly what it's for. What I didn't expect to hear was that the isolation and the depression and the anxiety is being driven, particularly in our young people, in the elementary age. It's hard to believe.
Board Member Beckman.
So, a request.
Sure.
A request with this would be to somehow incorporate our teen town halls as part of, which we have talked about many times, and making sure that we continue. They're so important to hear from our kids specifically about these topics that you raised that are very worthy, but that was kind of the genesis of wanting those teen town halls to start here, was to hear from them about the issues that you bring up, that, what they're thinking. And certainly now, in the time that we're in, they could be different than when they began 2 years ago. So that's my observation, is I would love to see how we can kind of bring that back and incorporate those teen town halls in this whole overarching. So thank you for this.
Well, thank you. That is a very constructive comment. Thank you.
I would actually like to thank you, Vice President Hartwells, for putting this together, because you mentioned many things that are very important to the work that we do here in this school district. And I think that it makes it even more important for our general public to understand the importance of our actions and our words that we use with one another in private and in public, because our kids are watching, they are paying attention, and it is evident through this information, aside from basic observation, that kids do often pick up on the spilling over of burden and stress, and they care for their parents and their providers, and they're usually the last person they would go to, and that's one of the importance of our public schools, is that all of our children are welcome, all of our children are accepted, and all of our teachers care about our students. We also have many layers of support within our district, and Vice President Hartwells, can you share just a few of the conversations that you had, who you had them with in our district, aside from those layers of organizations that we do utilize, like who in our district is responsible for providing great opportunities for our kids other than classroom teachers and support staff?
Of course, classroom teachers and coaches are kind of first-line mentors for a lot of our kids. These are the people I thanked. I didn't want to name them, but I will. Ms. Crone and Mr. Linz, we had a very enlightening conversation, and I want to applaud their efforts, their great efforts, and sometimes thankless efforts, particularly in the last year and a half. And it is also an intent of mine that this discussion item raise and elevate their work at the level of the governing board, so that our community knows that we, as professionals, support those efforts in our community and see those as important. They've done some wonderful work. And I will just note that in the interest of, at the moment, the board policy does still say it can't be more than 2 hours, but the report that's suggested in the discussion item, is my understanding there is Mr. Lenz and Ms. Crone have been keeping excellent data on the multi-tier structure, the support structures that the campuses that are participating in positive behavior programs and frameworks. So that should not be a time burden. And I very much, if nothing else is agreed to in a later meeting, just so the public knows this is discussion, there is no vote tonight. But if anything, I ask that at least get through, that we see a presentation on some of the great things that are going on campus, and that we look at that with a critical eye to how do we identify best practices and scale those so that we can impact more students and staff. And I can't emphasize that enough. I want to not just draw a pat on the back and put some support behind their excellent efforts, but also to expand the scope of how we think about social, emotional, mental well-being to include all of our staff. Does that help?
That does help. Thank you. And I know this is a discussion item, and I think it really bears repeating that our actions actually indicate our priorities as a district. So I would like for us to move much of these into future agenda items for action.
Board President Sanowski, may I make a couple comments?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Board Member Hartwells, because this is a very important topic. I reviewed your proposal, and it seems, based on your proposal and your words tonight, that you are looking to hopefully make some of these changes permanent, such as information related to safe storage of firearms, annual reporting requirements from the district. These are things that I fully support. We do have a board policy on instruction and training and suicide prevention. We actually updated that policy as a board in September of last year, and in accordance with Arizona law, we expanded that policy to place National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and other prevention awareness information on student cards themselves when they're issued. I did provide, because I did not see a policy proposal amendment, I did put a number of your recommendations into a policy proposal and submitted that last night. That obviously could not be shown or discussed tonight because it's not agendized, but I did want to make that noted. I don't think you meant to say this. You used the term unintentional suicide, and I just want to be clear that suicide is obviously an intentional act, and overdoses are different. But I do have to point out that isolation and COVID are obviously risk factors that have increased childhood suicide rates, as is access to weapons. But there are a number of very important factors that the CDC, Child Mind Institute, numerous organizations have listed. And those whys are important because they direct how we address things. Of course, barriers to accessing services and lack of social support are two critical risk factors associated with child suicide. But so is struggling or being a member of a certain sexual orientation in an environment that is not respectful or accepting of that orientation. That is a risk factor. And I think, again, if I may reiterate, the comments tonight are in no ways respectful or accepting of our students from certain minority groups, including LGBTQ plus groups. And it is paramount as a district that we do everything we can to ensure that students feel included in our district and feel that they have a safe place to participate, including in GSA clubs. And I think to ignore these other risk factors like trauma, like sexual orientation, psychiatric disorders, family history, etc., undermines the progress that we could make with this discussion overall. So I hope to see those matters also incorporated, and I hope to see the governing board take a much firmer line against members of the public who attend our board meetings and make our LGBTQ students feel uncomfortable and unsafe and unable to speak publicly at them.
Thank you. Thank you, Board Member Greenberg. So in terms of including more, I just want to comment, this was an exercise in me trying to stay focused in one area, and in no way should that be construed as me assigning some value to certain aspects of trauma over others. And if that was understood to be that, then it was completely unintentional, and I don't believe that at all. But I crafted this intentionally so that it could be one step, one part to open up a conversation that's bigger, that is more comprehensive. This is in no way comprehensive, and I don't pretend it. I didn't intend it to be. But I wanted to start the conversation and start with the highest impact consequence of suicide. So this was I hope this is a beginning and not an end to the conversation. But I very much appreciate your comments and agree with them. Thank you.
Vice President Hartwells, in no way was that my intent. I think you have rightly started off on a really strong foot here, and I was simply pointing out that there is so much that can be discussed and added in, which is why I appreciate that we've started this discussion, that you've started it off again this year, because I do believe in what you're trying to accomplish here. And I hope by putting it into policy, we can cement those changes, not just for a one-year period, but for a lifetime until the board changes it, I suppose. But I do think it is very important, given the discussions we've already had tonight, that we, and what we've heard from the will of the community, so to speak, that there are very firm lines that this board should be drawing with the public. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg. Dr. Sakos.
Thank you. Oops, can you hear me?
I can hear her.
Yeah, I can hear.
Thank you. I just want to echo the appreciation toward Dr. Hartwells for putting this on the agenda tonight, to have a heightened awareness on the challenges that our youth are facing today, and our staff is very important. And as stated, this students suffering from social, emotional, and mental health have a hard time accessing and showing academic growth. So thank you for putting it on. I'll try not to talk a lot tonight because I'm very excited about our multi-tier systems of support that Ms. Cron and Matt Lenz have really been working hard to refine. And there's always room for improvement, but we look forward to bringing that presentation to you before the end of this school year, or June 30 as it is stated. And you can look forward to some invites to our mental health in schools networking event. It is our 12th annual. It is coming up in March. We have an average of 30 partners that come to this event, and there are administrators from all over the valley, and social workers and school counselors and psychologists that come to our event that Ms. Cron does coordinate. So you'll get an invite to that, and we're glad that we can have that back in person this year, whereas last year we had to go virtual. And you'll also be receiving some invites to our teen town halls at each of our high schools this spring as well. So thank you. And I don't know if Ms. Cron wants to say anything, but I'm sure she echoes my appreciation as well.
Dr. Sakos, may I ask you a question about some of the activities we have participated in with our students pre-COVID, and I want to know if we're going to be bringing back the mini-town and uni-town experience for our students.
Yes, our mini-town and unitown are in its planning stages now. We've actually have secured additional funding from the Scottsdale Foundation toward both of those programs. So they will be able to go back in person as of today, over that long President's Day weekend in February. Yes, we're knocking on wood, and mini-town as well.
Super, thank you.
You're welcome.
May I?
Dr. Sakos, I want to thank you and James for your time also that you spent with me, and your talent and your input.
Sorry. I want to thank Dr. Sakos and James Dorr, both of also whom spent some time with me to help inform this document. And I appreciate your expertise and your collaboration and your attitude towards strengthening the things in our support. We want to support your efforts in this effort. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Dr. Menzel, do you have anything to add?
Oh, well, I will. So I just want to echo the appreciation for the topic being put on the agenda this evening, for the reminder of the importance that this is for our students and our staff, and that the acknowledgement of the hard work of our team that's ongoing, but also I am a big proponent of scale and replicate, and I think that's best practice for us, and then being able to tell the story as we're able to celebrate successes. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So that would end our discussion session of this governing board meeting, and we will move on to 8, consent agenda. Are there any changes to our agenda? Board Member Beckman?
No changes. Just noticed on
Gosh darn. No changes. I just noticed on the agenda something that I just wanted to point out and say thank you for. Routinely, when something is significant on consent that's a gift to our district, we will call it out. And on this agenda, we have our annual Charo's gift of $1,000 per school. And I just want to, again, because they also had donated a check for $40,000 for our social emotional last year, that we do appreciate those gifts for each of our schools.
Thank you. I would actually like to, if I may, pull a particular item.
We need to check with Lori if we can do it now, because we didn't when we adopted the agenda.
Let's see if I can find a word in my report.
Yes.
So it's my understanding,
I
President.
don't think your mic's on.
I'll take it, sure.
Okay, I'm told it's on.
Okay.
So it's my understanding that you've already requested changes to the agenda and that no changes to the agenda were requested, which would have been the time to pull an agenda item off of consent and into action. So at this time, I don't believe that our rules of order allow for an agenda item be pulled from consent.
Lesson learned. Thank you. Board Member Beckman, your light is on. Did you request to speak? Nope. Okay. All right. At this time, then, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
And
Second.
seconded by Dr. Hartwells. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes 5-0. At this time, we will begin with Section 9 of our governing board meeting, which is action items. The review of strategic plan, draft goals, and commitments will be led by Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Sanowski and members of the governing board. The hour is late, and the agenda topic is one that is not new to you. We've had conversations about this before, but just a quick summary. The governing board previously approved Phase 1 of our strategic planning process that include the district's mission, vision, and values. Phase 2 is wrapping up. We have one more session tomorrow with the members of the strategic planning design team. But what we're asking the governing board to formally ratify this evening are the 5 goal areas with the specific commitments. These have been reviewed and wordsmithed and revised on numerous occasions. The most recent meeting was on January 5th. I would be happy to entertain any questions as are members of the team who were participants in that process. We do have draft key performance indicators, but we're not asking for approval of those this evening because that's still part of the final work. And then we are planning to move very quickly into Phase 3 where we put meat on the bones. So this is the framing. And then the specific action steps, activities, initiatives in order to deliver on this will be the final part that we'll bring back to the governing board by June 30th, which is, of course, part of the goals that the governing board has set for me, but also part of what we need to be able to do to springboard into achieving what we've set out related to providing world-class future-focused education for all of our students. So our goal tonight would be to have the governing board approve this so that we can actually then pivot towards the real substantive work, engaging our staff at all of the building levels in terms of how do we actually live into these goals and commitments in order to produce improved results for our students.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Board Member Beckman.
Okay, so to be clear, that's where you're going to get into kind of the detailed strategies and the measurable goals and how we're going to actually achieve what you put through.
That is correct.
Okay.
And we'll be able to tell that story. So just as a quick example, during the last all-admin meeting, there was an exercise that took each building principal looked at their school improvement plan and these draft goals to identify ways in which they're already addressing some of these in their school improvement plans and opportunities for incorporating some of these for future reference. Now, not every single commitment relates to every building's school improvement plan, but we've already started some of that work, but this phase 3 is where we really put all of those details into place and that we bring that back to you before the end of the school year.
Okay, thank you.
Do any other board members have questions or comments? No? I would just like to comment, it does appear that many of our discussions with this board and actions do support these strategic plan goals. Just wanted to comment that. If I have no other questions or comments, I ask that we have a motion to approve the review of strategic plan draft goals and commitments.
So moved.
Second.
And seconded by Vice President Hartwells. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Board Member Greenberg, did you vote?
Well, I moved it and I voted yes.
Oh, you did? Okay, I didn't hear you from the cloud. Okay, thank you. The motion passes 5-0. And we will move on to the next item, again led by Dr. Menzel, approval of selection of audit committee member.
Per board policy, we have 2 governing board members on the audit committee. We've had a request of one of the governing board members to step down from that assignment. Dr. Wells has asked for the board to consider a replacement. So this evening, we're looking for a second board member to serve on the audit committee. Board
member or President Sanowski, do you mind if I make a comment?
Please.
Superintendent Menzel, our board policy DIE actually states that at least one member shall be a governing board member, not 2. So I just want to clarify that we could, if no board members were interested, we could go out and find a 4th community member.
I appreciate that feedback, Board Member Greenberg, and I don't believe it's that they're not interested. I believe it's that we are all stretched very thin. So just want to make a note of that. It's not a lack of interest. No, I just don't want the general public to think that.
That was poor wording. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, okay. Any questions, comments? Hearing none or seeing none, do I have a motion to approve this?
I'd like to comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped the gun there. Dr. Hart-Wells.
I just wanted to add that I would like to be replaced on the committee only because of time commitments. This is not a comment on the merit of the committee. It's an outstanding committee, and the community members that are on and volunteer on that committee have done a wonderful job, and it's an excellent, certainly objective. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Hart-Wells. At this time, do I have a motion to approve the non-selection?
Wouldn't it be modified if we're going?
Yeah.
Or just table or go away?
So what's noticed on the agenda under
Right.
open meeting law, notice to the public is the appointment of another member to serve. If you want to do something different, if you want to modify that, that's certainly within the purview of the board, as would be tabling this discussion to a later date if you want to have further discussion. I am trying to pull up the policy here, but
I actually have the policy it says the audit committee shall consist of either 3 or 5 members that collectively possess sufficient knowledge of audit, finance, and specific industry knowledge, information technology, law, governance, risk, and control. At least one member shall be a governing board member. So to that point, we could, like we do with other committees, put it on the committee hub, invite people to apply, review those applications, and bring back a recommendation for a 4th member that's not a governing board member. So the first question was whether or not we have volunteers from the governing board. If we do not, then the second order of business would be to recruit and then bring that back to the board for approval.
But certainly it would not be good practice to go forward with doing nothing.
Thanks. Board Member Beckman.
I think Board Member Lindsay had his button pushed.
I was just going to say that I think it's a great idea to add another community member, so.
Can you repeat that?
I just think it's a great idea to add another community member.
Thank you, Board Member Lindsay. Board Member Beckman?
So should we modify it or let it fail by no motion? Ms. Byrd?
I'm going to looking at exactly how the agenda item was noticed to the public. All it says is you have to appoint a new audit committee member. Certainly, if you're going to add a member of the community, you're unable to do that at this time because you can't do that. I would suggest in this circumstance that you are not able to appoint a new audit committee member, but that you can modify the motion and put a different motion on the table dealing with the audit committee member itself, because you're unable to name the person that will be appointed to that.
Sure. I would like to move that we table 9B, approval of selection of audit committee member at this time. Do I have a second?
Okay, I'm sorry. Or you could modify it and say, and move for the approval of the selection of an audit committee member to be opened up to a community member on the committee.
Either of those options. You can table it. You can appoint a member of the board. If you table it, please remember that you can only table an item once without taking action on it. Or if there is someone on the board who is willing to step forward and serve, then certainly you may go ahead and approve that person if they are willing to serve. So yes, Board Member Beckman, you are correct that you could motion to appoint a member of the community. However, you would not be able to name that person at this meeting.
A motion has been made to table the item. Do I have a second?
One last question. If we table it, can we proceed with picking a community member or opening it up on the committee hub to allow a community member to join? I just want clarity on that. If tabling this does not allow us to do that, it's still, if we table this, we're still allowed to go and have it be on the community or the committee hub, and community member can apply to join the audit committee, even if we table this.
Correct. Because you did not get anyone willing to serve from the board, you can table it until you have, I mean, the other thing that could, in theory, happen is you will get no members of the community that want to serve, in which case you may have to come back and revisit it, which is all retabling does, is it revisits this particular agenda item.
Board Member Hartwells?
I second the motion to table.
Thank you. We have a second from Dr. Hartwells. All in favor to table this item, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes to table item 9B, approval of selection audit committee member. And at this time, we will turn the show over to our in-house counsel, Lori Bird, for a second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDD.
Good late evening, board members. Based on the conversation that was had in the first reading of the other policy documents that was had. At this time, I would like to withdraw my recommendation to approve both BEDD and BEDH because of the discussion that occurred previously. It doesn't make sense to approve these items only to have a second read on the exact same policies at another meeting. So at this time, you could make a motion, you still have the option to approve these policies. My recommendation is simply withdrawn that you do that. But you can proceed to make a motion to vote on these items as appropriate.
I would make a motion to accept your withdrawal of both the reads of BEDD and BEDH.
I'm not withdrawing the action item
Right?
itself.
You're withdrawing the motion,
The recommendation.
the recommendation.
I'm withdrawing the recommendation, that is correct. I would ask that the board do take action on this so that we can close the loop and not have a first read hanging out there with a second read, and then never do a second read. So I would really like to close the loop and for the board to take action on this item as appropriate.
I'm sorry, Councilor Byrd, do you mean to say that you would like us to table items 9C and 9D if we feel like doing so in order to ensure that we don't then have another second read on the other changes follow up separately?
That wasn't my intent. Certainly, you could do that. But my intent was for the board to take action on these items in light of the prior discussion that was had and determine whether or not they would like to go forward with these items or whether or not they would like to put them to their final rest, so to speak, in this particular format. So either a motion to approve or to reject this particular version of those policies.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right, that's fine.
I make a motion to reject the 9C, the second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDD. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a second, and all in favor of rejecting the second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDD, please say aye.
Can you get clarity, please?
Yeah, so what you're doing is voting for approval or not approval of these particular agenda items as written here.
So a rejection would be a no vote?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So you would just move for approval, and if we reject it, we vote no?
Correct.
That would be one way, or...
You may make a motion to...
The motion was made to reject
Right.
the approval.
To take action, yes or no on this particular agenda item.
Correct.
Okay. You moved and you seconded? Okay.
Jan Michael Greenberg seconded. To reject the proposed changes.
Yes. Okay. So all in favor to reject the proposed changes at this time, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? At this time, 9C, second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDD has been rejected.
Correct. And just to clarify for the public, these policies have not passed and will not be incorporated into the policies of the governing board.
And now on to 9D as well. So I make a motion to reject the approval of the second read of revisions to policy BEDH. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All in, Board Member Beckman, seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion to reject the second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDH has passed. At this time, we move on to Section 10, future agenda items. Do any governing board members have future agenda items they would like to propose? Dr.
Can I
Hartwells?
have I'm sorry, I am very sorry to interrupt this, but I need a little bit of clarity on that last vote, if possible, because I've never voted to reject something before. So just for the record, these policies, when we did a first read, were new. So explain what we just did, please.
So on the first read that was held way back, I believe in November, these were suggested changes from ASBA that were brought to the board by myself for consideration. At the end of the first read, there were some suggestions that were made to revise the language. I went back and I revised the policy language as noted in your packet. Very small wording changes based on board feedback. You then reviewed the item as revised on the second read, and then a motion was made to reject the changes to this policy. In each policy, it was a one-section revision only. And so you rejected those changes, and the policy remains unchanged.
So the policies themselves were approved in November? Just to refresh my memory.
No.
So we don't have the policy existing.
No, they were.
No, we do have the policy existing. What was on the first read was a change in BEDD. That change had to do with commercial presentations. No, that's BEDH.
Right.
In BEDD, the change had to do with adjourning the meeting.
Right.
Without a vote of the board in the case of an unruly or unsafe situation.
Okay.
And so those additions to those policies will not go into effect, but the policies themselves will remain as board policy until changed by the board.
Okay, thank you.
Can I give the effective, the date?
Please. Dr. Menzel?
So BEDD had last been adopted or amended February 10th of 2015 before the review, and BEDH had been adopted August 6th of 2019.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yep.
I had called for future agenda items. Do any board members have future agenda items? Dr. Hartwells.
I request that we turn the discussion item directed to social, emotional, and mental well-being into an action item at a subsequent meeting, please.
Thank you. Any others?
I would, Board President Snowski, I would like for that proposal to be in, if assuming Vice President Hartwells agrees, I would like for that to be in policy format, because otherwise it could change year from year, and by putting that into policy. So if it is brought back, I would like a policy change proposed that incorporates those requests.
Did you want to comment?
I would just ask if we could, if the policy draft that I understand is relaxing with you could be shared with the board at some point. I believe Board Member Greenberg indicated that he had drafted a policy that contained components of the discussion item, if I understood that correctly.
That's correct, and I did not
You
have
have
a
not
part in
reviewed
drafting that.
You have not reviewed that.
Okay,
and that's fine.
We shared last night.
Correct. And although I have done I've read it, but I have not done a deep enough read to, I haven't vetted it legally, no.
Fair enough. I just was requesting, if we're going to look at this as a policy, that we be able to see what after your legal review, Ms. Bird, if you could share that so that we could look at that. It'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that information. So it has been proposed future agenda items. Dr. Hartwell's discussion item 7C, social, emotional, and mental health of students and staff, be agendized. Are there any others? Nope. Okay, on to 11, dates of upcoming meetings. Our next meeting is Tuesday, February 8th, 2020 at 6 p.m. That is a special governing board meeting at the MDA, followed by Tuesday, February 22nd, 2022 at 6 p.m., and that will be our next regular governing board meeting here at Coronado High School. At this time, we'll move on to 12 governing board reports. Board Member Beckman.
Just a couple of quick things. I think we were all very impressed to attend, those that did the MLK Voices event. I thought it was outstanding, as it always is. Thank you to Saguaro for hosting. A huge thank you to the students that spoke. We obviously had an incredible keynote speaker, but the students, for me, always make the event. I mean, they're brave, they're inspiring, and they're the reason why we do what we do. So well done, Saguaro. Well done, kids. Project Prom is coming up again. I want to give a shout out to Scottsdale Bella Bride because they donated 50 dresses to me yesterday. It was pretty fantastic. So we're looking at the first weekend in March to host our event again, district-wide, but housed at Saguaro in the parking lot so that anyone in the district that feels like they need a dress for free to attend this event is welcome to come. Any student that shows their ID.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. Any mom that feels like going out, no kidding. Any of our students that want to come and shop, we welcome it. One last thing, I am on the Charles Foundation as well because I think it's a worthy cause as they do a great job supporting our district. They are bringing forth a license plate, just so you all are aware, and the revenue from that will in part go to the organization, which will then move on to supporting our students and the district. So it's something to look forward to, seeing on the street, and I hope some of you get one for yourselves.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Hart-Wells?
Thank you. I had the pleasure of participating in a few of the Scottsdale Parent Council forums this past month. One directed to the Special Education System of Supports and Services. I want to thank everybody who participated in that presentation. Also, on our career and technical education course offerings, it was a very interesting presentation. And I will just remind folks that the EVIT Expo is coming up this Saturday and encourage you to participate in that. I also want to thank the Kiva Elementary School, Mr. Grumick, for hosting me in the past couple of weeks, and Dr. Michael at Ingleside Middle School for also hosting me. It reminded me actually, the Parada del Sol is taking place in a couple of weeks, and you will see some of our Kiva Cougars out there in some construction gear that they're getting from their friends that are in the back, building a beautiful new site for them. I thought that was cute. I also had the privilege of participating in the MLK Youth Voices, and I was rendered speechless, to be frank. Very inspiring, to say the least, and I'm very impressed. And it just reminded me of kind of what dignity looks like. Thank you. And a last shout out to the Desert Mountain High School POM team for taking top honors in 2 categories in the state qualifiers last weekend. So good job, Wolves.
Great board reports. Any other great board reports? Nope. Well, then let me share a little bit. I had the great privilege of joining many of you at the Voices Scottsdale Community Dinner, as well as our fantastic Voices celebration at Saguaro High School. I was able to participate in a webinar that I found to be very interesting and appropriate. It was titled Building Equity in a Divided Community. I was able to participate with Dr. Hart-Wells in a Scottsdale roundtable discussion, and they're always interested in what's going on with our schools, and when I say they, it is community leaders of various sorts. Board member Beckman and myself had a conversation through Zoom to brainstorm and tighten up our actions with the Scottsdale Joint Education Committee. That work continues, and that's an attempt to work more collaboratively within our Scottsdale community. And then I'm glad Board member Beckman brought up the gifts, because we should be very thankful for all the opportunities that people give of their time, talents, and finances to our students in our district. And just to note, from tonight's board agenda, Jeff and Dina Cutbirth contributing to the CMAS at Arcadia High School. Again, the Scottsdale Churros Foundation continuously show generosity towards our schools and our students and staff members. Honor Health, I saw, did support in giving extra donations to Unitown. And parent partner organizations throughout our district continue to work hard on behalf of finances for our schools, specifically to note in this agenda, Copper Ridge, Desert Canyon Elementary, and Hopi. And I would like, this has been brought up a couple times, and I actually would like to share this at this point. This is a message from the 7th grader and a member of the Kokopah Middle School GSA, which for those that don't understand or they don't understand that acronym, it stands for Gay Straight Alliance. His comments are very telling. I am here to speak about the concern about our school's Gay Straight Alliance, or better known as GSA. GSA is not only a way for LGBTQ students to feel accepted on school grounds, but it also provides them a branch of support that they may not have under their own roof. We do not understand that this topic can be too mature for some students, but other students have experienced things throughout their lives, or still do, that have made them mature faster, and that the average student, allowing them to understand the concept. Therefore, it gives them the opportunity to accept and learn about the LGBTQ community at their age. As far as elementary students learning or identifying as a member of the LGBT community, they should be accepted wherever they stand on the subject, although it is a very mature conversation. But if students don't believe or support the LGBT community, that is within their right, and no one from GSA will force our beliefs onto them, whether it be a student or a teacher. If students don't want to participate, they don't have to. Middle school is known to be a hard time for young teens figuring out who they are. But for the ones who already have, they should be able to have a safe place on campus to ensure that they feel comfortable in a learning environment. We shouldn't be taking that support system away from them struggling students. As far as bullying goes, most of the students who get bullied on campus are openly a member of the LGBTQ community. LGBTQ students do not get barked at by students. LGBT students not only get barked at by students, but they get slurs thrown at them in the hallways and can sometimes be physically harassed. At GSA, students eat snacks and talk about things that have been going on in their lives. GSA is an all-inclusive club that has straight members partake in these activities as well. GSA does not harm to today's developing youth, but it allows oppressed students to be themselves and feel comfortable on our campus. Again, that is from a 7th grade student in our district, and I think the message stands for itself. Compassion and kindness and grace are really important for all of us to show to one another. And with that, I call for a motion to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg. It's been a long night. Seconds the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. This meeting is adjourned.